Picture yourself walking through the streets of London, the familiar sounds of the city, a constant hum around you. You pass the towering majesty of Big Ben, the ancient stones of the Tower of London, and the bustling energy of Trafalgar Square. These are the postcard images, the landmarks we all know. But what if I told you that hidden in plain sight, nestled among these world-famous icons, are objects with stories so strange, so deeply shrouded in mystery, that they challenge everything we think we know about this city's past? We're not talking about grand monuments, but specific, tangible artifacts, a strange stone here, a peculiar piece of metal there, each one a silent keeper of a secret history. For generations, we've accepted their official stories, but what if those stories are wrong? What if some of London's most cherished historical objects aren't what they seem at all? This is the beginning of a journey into the shadows of history, a quest to uncover the true, and often controversial, origins of 20 specific London artifacts. We are about to pull back the velvet curtain of accepted narrative and peer into the dimly lit backrooms where the real stories were written, and sometimes deliberately erased. This isn't just an academic exercise, it's a detective story spanning centuries, filled with whispers of forgery, misplaced identities, and origins so unexpected they sound more like fiction than fact. Each artifact we explore is a piece of a larger, more complex puzzle, a portrait of London not as a static museum, but as a living, breathing entity with a past that is far from settled. So I invite you to join me as we embark on this exploration of London's secret past. We will examine the evidence, question the long-held assumptions, and follow the tantalizing clues that historians have either overlooked or chosen to ignore. This is a voyage into the heart of the city's greatest enigmas, where the truth is often stranger and far more fascinating than the legend. The familiar skyline of London is about to become a map of mysteries, and together, we are going to read it. Our journey into London's secret history begins not in a grand museum, but with an object so profoundly out of place that its very existence seems to defy the timeline of human civilization. This is the story of the London Hammer, though its name is a slight misdirection. It was actually discovered in the town of London, Texas, in the 1930s. Yet, its implications ripple across the Atlantic, challenging foundational ideas about technology and time that are deeply relevant to any historical mystery, including those hidden within the city of London, England. The artifact itself appears, at first glance, to be a simple tool, a hammerhead made of iron, with a wooden handle partially fused into its head. It's the kind of tool a 19th century blacksmith might have used. The profound mystery, however, lies not in its design, but in its context. This hammer was found completely encased in a solid nodule of Cretaceous rock, a geological formation that dates back over 100 million years, to an era when dinosaurs roamed the Earth. The conventional geological explanation proposed by mainstream science is a process known as concretion. In this view, the hammer is not nearly as ancient as the rock that surrounds it. The theory suggests that the hammer, perhaps lost by a miner or settler in the 19th century, fell into a mineral-rich solution. Over a relatively short period, maybe just a few centuries, minerals in the water crystallized around the object, forming a hard, stone-like shell that perfectly encased it. Proponents of this viewpoint to the specific type of limestone in the region, which is known for its ability to form concretions rapidly under the right chemical conditions. They argue that the hammer's iron shows a low carbon content, consistent with more recent metallurgy, and that the wooden handle, while mineralized, is not truly fossilized in the classical sense. For them, the London Hammer is a fascinating example of a geochemical oddity, but not a historical impossibility. However, this straightforward explanation is passionately contested by those who champion alternative historical theories. For them, the hammer is a literal smoking gun, tangible proof that our understanding of the ancient past is fundamentally flawed. They ask a simple, yet staggering, question. How could a modern, manufactured object become sealed inside rock that predates the evolution of humans by millions of years? Their conclusions venture into the realm of the extraordinary. Some propose it is evidence of a lost, advanced civilization, perhaps the fabled Atlantis, whose technological achievements were wiped from the historical record by a global cataclysm. Others take the idea even further, suggesting the hammer could be a relic of time travel, an artifact from our future that was accidentally left behind in the distant past. While these theories are dismissed by the scientific establishment, they force a crucial and uncomfortable debate about the limitations of our dating methods and the completeness of the archaeological record. Today, the hammer resides in a museum dedicated to such curiosities, the Creation Evidence Museum in Texas, where it is presented as evidence supporting a young Earth creationist perspective. Its presence there has, perhaps inevitably, polarized the scientific discourse around it. Mainstream archaeologists and geologists often refuse to engage with it, seeing it as a piece of pseudo-archaeology, while independent researchers continue to perform their own analyses, claiming to find evidence of a unique iron alloy that should not exist in nature. This ongoing debate makes the London hammer more than just a peculiar relic. It becomes a symbol of the conflict between established academic consensus and the tantalizing, often disruptive, power of a single anomalous discovery. It reminds us that every artifact we accept as genuine carries with it a weight of assumption, and that sometimes the smallest, most ordinary-looking object can punch a hole in the most solidly constructed historical narratives. But for an artifact that truly hits closer to home, we travel from the Texas countryside to the very heart of London itself, pulled from the muddy banks of the River Thames. This discovery shifts our focus from a tool that seems impossibly old to a human bone that suggests a death impossibly advanced. It is a human skull, carbon dated to the Roman period, roughly 2,000 years old, a time of sandals, swords, and sprawling empires. Yet this ancient Roman skull carries a shocking and singular wound, a small, perfectly round hole in the back of the head, so neat and precise that it looks less like an ancient injury and more like the work of a modern firearm. The immediate, almost instinctual reaction upon seeing this skull is one of temporal dislocation. The hole is so clean, with no signs of the radial cracking or splintering you would expect from an arrow strike, a spear thrust, or a blow from a club. This has led to a compelling, if controversial, hypothesis. Could this be evidence of a gunshot wound centuries before the invention of gunpowder in Europe? Proponents of this theory argue that the ballistics speak for themselves. They point out that the hole's entrance is clean and circular, while the exit wound on the opposite side of the skull is significantly larger and more fragmented, a classic signature of a high-velocity projectile, where the bullet tumbles and expands as it passes through bone, expelling energy violently upon its exit. To the untrained eye, and even to some trained in forensics, the wound presents a startlingly modern profile on a decidedly ancient relic. Mainstream archaeology, however, offers a different set of explanations, grounded in the known medical and material practices of the Roman world. The primary hypothesis is that this hole is the result of a surgical procedure known as trepanation. This was an ancient and surprisingly common practice where a hole was drilled or scraped into the human skull. The Romans performed trepanation for a variety of reasons: to relieve pressure from a head injury, to treat severe migraines or mental illness, or perhaps to release what were believed to be evil spirits trapped inside the head. A skilled Roman surgeon using a dedicated drill, like a terebra, could indeed create a remarkably clean, circular opening. But this is where the evidence becomes conflicted. The pattern of bone regrowth around the edge of the hole, or the lack thereof, is crucial. If the individual survived the procedure, new bone growth would typically appear around the aperture over time. The ambiguous state of this evidence on the Thames skull leaves room for ongoing debate, leaving the question of survival, and therefore the nature of the procedure, tantalizingly open. Another plausible, if less dramatic, theory is that the injury was inflicted by a more conventional Roman weapon, but in a very specific way. A powerful projectile from a ballista, a massive Roman crossbow-like artillery piece that fired heavy bolts, could potentially create a clean puncture wound if it struck at a perfect perpendicular angle. Similarly, a concentrated, precise thrust from a sharp, narrow tool, like a metal punch or a spike, could also produce a hole of this nature. These explanations keep the skull within the realm of known Roman technology, albeit as a rare and unfortunate example of traumatic injury. Yet, for many, these explanations still feel insufficient, failing to fully account for the bullet-like morphology of the entry and exit wounds. This apparent paradox inevitably fuels more speculative lines of inquiry, forcing us to consider possibilities that challenge our linear perception of history. If it wasn't trepanation, and it wasn't a known weapon, then what could have caused it? Could it be evidence of a lost, or deliberately suppressed, technological breakthrough? We know the Chinese were experimenting with early gunpowder around the same period. Is it conceivable that the knowledge of such technology traveled further and faster than our history books admit? Even more radically, could this skull be a piece of evidence for time travel, much like the theories surrounding the London Hammer, a grim souvenir from a future conflict accidentally left in the past? While these ideas reside firmly on the fringe, the very existence of this skull ensures that they cannot be entirely dismissed out of hand. It stands as a silent, skeletal witness, its story forever locked in bone, forcing us to confront the uncomfortable truth that the past may not be as easily categorized as we would like to believe. Moving from the visceral mystery of a human skull to the rarefied world of high art, we encounter a different kind of enigma, one carved not in bone, but in ivory. Nestled within the collections tied to London's historic Leadenhall Street is an object of breathtaking beauty and profound scholarly dispute, a Byzantine diptych. For those unfamiliar, a diptych is essentially a two-paneled object, often connected by hinges, used in the ancient and medieval world for everything from wax notebooks for writing to ceremonial religious artworks. This particular example is a masterpiece of intricate carving, depicting figures and scenes that seem to breathe with the spirit of the late Roman Empire. For generations, its provenance was considered settled. It was a genuine 5th century treasure, a priceless import from the heart of the Byzantine world that had somehow found its way to the cold, damp shores of England. It represented a tangible thread connecting London to the splendor of Constantinople, a silent witness to the flow of art, commerce, and influence across a vast and crumbling empire. The traditional attribution rests on a foundation of stylistic analysis. Art historians have long pointed to specific characteristics they believe are impossible to fake. The delicate, almost fluid folds of the robes worn by the figures, the particular rendering of their serene and elongated faces, and the compositional harmony of the entire piece all scream of a specific moment in time, the tail end of the classical tradition, just before the artistic conventions of the medieval world fully took hold. These ivories were often created to commemorate the appointment of a consul or another high official, making them not just art objects, but historical documents in their own right. The assumption was that this diptych was one such official commission, created in an imperial workshop around the year 490, and that its journey to London, while undocumented, was part of the vast and chaotic movement of artifacts following the empire's decline. However, a shadow of doubt has been cast over this elegant narrative by a controversial and compelling theory. What if the Leadenhall Street diptych is not a relic of a fallen empire, but a brilliant Renaissance counterfeit? The 15th and 16th centuries in Europe saw an explosion of interest in classical antiquity. Wealthy patrons, nobles, and newly powerful merchant families developed an insatiable appetite for owning a piece of the glorious past. This created a booming market, and where there is high demand and even higher prices, forgery inevitably follows. The theory suggests that this diptych might be the work of a supremely talented, yet anonymous, Renaissance master, commissioned to create a fake antiquity for a collector who desired the prestige of owning such an object more than he cared about its authenticity. The forger would have studied surviving Roman and Byzantine ivories, painstakingly replicating their style and subject matter to create a piece so convincing it could fool experts for centuries. To uncover the truth, experts have turned to a battery of art historical detective techniques that go far beyond simple stylistic comparison. One of the most critical is the analysis of tool marks. The tools available to a 5th century ivory carver were fundamentally different from those available to a Renaissance artist. A genuine ancient piece would show the specific striations and gouges left by hand-powered drills and chisels, while a later forgery might betray the use of more advanced, efficient tools, even if the forger was trying to hide them. Another method involves studying the object's patina and surface wear. Genuine ancient ivory develops a specific, deep crackle pattern and a unique sheen from centuries of handling and exposure. A forger might attempt to simulate this aging by baking the ivory, applying chemicals, or artificially distressing the surface. But these methods often create patterns that are too uniform or that penetrate the material in ways that natural aging does not. Furthermore, scholars scrutinize the iconography, the specific symbols, poses, and stylistic quirks, with an almost microscopic intensity. They search for anachronisms, for a detail that a 5th century artist would never have included, but that a Renaissance one, influenced by the art of his own time, might have inadvertently added. Despite these sophisticated techniques, a definitive consensus on the Leadenhall diptych remains elusive, and doubts linger in the hallowed halls of museums and universities. Some experts point to what they perceive as a certain softness in the carving, a stylistic flourish that feels more evocative of the Renaissance rediscovery of classicism than the authentic, hardened classicism of the late Empire itself. Others argue that its sheer state of preservation is almost too good to be true. Finding a large, delicate ivory panel from the 5th century with minimal damage is exceptionally rare. The debate often circles back to a fundamental question in art history. Can we ever truly know the hand of an artist separated from us by 1,500 years? Or are we, in our desire to connect with the past, sometimes seeing what we want to see? The Leadenhall Street diptych sits in its display case, a beautiful and inscrutable puzzle. It challenges our confidence in expertise and reminds us that the line between a priceless ancient artifact and a masterful forgery can be as fine as the line left by a carver's tool. Shifting our focus from singular, enigmatic objects to an entire treasure trove, we come to one of the most spectacular and perplexing discoveries ever made on British soil, the Cheapside Hoard. Imagine the scene in the year 1912, in the very heart of London. Workmen are laboring to demolish an old building on Cheapside, a street name that itself derives from the Old English word for market, a place steeped in centuries of commerce. As they break through a cellar floor, their shovels strike not just earth, but a wooden box, rotten with age. Inside, spilling into the dim light, is a king's ransom in glittering jewels. This was not a few scattered trinkets, it was the complete stock of a master jeweler. A breathtaking collection of over 400 pieces from the Elizabethan and Jacobean eras. We're talking about rings, pendants, chains, and earrings, all set with a kaleidoscope of emeralds, rubies, sapphires, and diamonds. It was and remains the greatest collection of 16th and 17th century jewelry in the entire world. The prevailing and most logical explanation for this hoard's burial centers on the tumultuous period of the English Civil War. The mid-17th century was a time of immense danger and uncertainty in London. As conflict raged between the royalists and the parliamentarians, the city was a tinderbox. Fires were common, looting was a constant threat, and a wealthy jeweler would have been a prime target. The most widely accepted theory is that a jeweler, perhaps seeing the approaching armies or hearing the riots in the streets, panicked. He gathered his most valuable, unsold stock, sealed it in a sturdy box, and hid it beneath the floor of his own cellar, intending to retrieve it when the danger had passed. For reasons we will never know, perhaps he was killed, forced to flee, or simply forgot its exact location. He never returned. The hoard slumbered in its secret vault for nearly 300 years, a silent, sparkling time capsule of a world that had moved on. But while this backstory is dramatic and plausible, it's the contents of the hoard itself, not the circumstances of its burial, that contain its most profound secret. When experts began to meticulously catalog and study these jewels, they encountered features that simply did not fit with the established historical narrative of European jewelry making. The craftsmanship revealed techniques that were astonishingly advanced for the period. For instance, several pieces feature incredibly delicate enamel work of a quality and complexity that was thought to be beyond the capabilities of European artisans at the time. Even more startling was the origin of the gems themselves. The hoard contains an astonishing number of Colombian emeralds, stones that boast a distinctive, deep, and pure green color sourced from mines in the New World that were, according to official records, only just being discovered by Spanish conquistadors. The speed with which these stones must have traveled from the jungles of South America to the workshops of London seems to defy the slow pace of 16th century global trade. This is where the mystery deepens from a simple story of hidden treasure into a radical reassessment of history. The presence of these specific gemstones and advanced techniques points to a global trade network that was far more extensive, sophisticated, and direct than our history books have ever admitted. We are taught that trade was slow, circuitous, and controlled by powerful monopolies like the Spanish and Portuguese crowns. But the Cheapside hoard whispers a different story. It suggests the existence of clandestine trade routes, of enterprising merchants and smugglers who operated outside official channels, moving goods with a speed and efficiency that rivaled the state-sanctioned fleets. Some pieces in the hoard even incorporate gems like spinels and chrysoberyl from Sri Lanka and the Indian subcontinent, further weaving a web of global connection that maps a world much smaller and more interconnected than we ever imagined. It wasn't just that these materials existed, it was that they were being worked in London, combined in pieces that show a cultural fusion, a blending of artistic ideas from across the globe that challenges the very Eurocentric view of the Renaissance. Could the jeweler who owned this stock have been part of this secretive network? Was his shop on Cheapside a clearinghouse for gems and styles that were, for all official intents and purposes, impossible to obtain? This theory transforms the hoard from a mere collection of beautiful objects into potential evidence of a shadow economy, a vibrant underground exchange of goods and knowledge that connected London to the farthest reaches of the known world. The mystery of the Cheapside hoard, therefore, is not really why it was buried, but how it ever came to exist in the first place. Every gleaming emerald, every intricately enameled setting, stands as a brilliant, defiant challenge to the simplified timeline of exploration and trade we have long accepted. It reveals that even in an age of sailing ships and handwritten letters, the world was already bound together by invisible threads of commerce, and that the most valuable secrets are sometimes hidden not in the earth, but in plain sight, waiting for a chance discovery to reveal a truth far richer than any single gem. But our journey through London's hidden history now brings us to an artifact so unassuming, so easily overlooked, that thousands of people walk past it every single day without a second glance. Tucked away behind a protective iron grille on Cannon Street is a modest, battered block of oolitic limestone, roughly the size and shape of a small pillow. This is the London Stone. To the uninformed eye, it is utterly unremarkable, a piece of rubble seemingly forgotten by time. Yet this simple stone carries a weight of legend and prophecy so immense that it has been described as the city's magical heart, its spiritual foundation stone. The most common, and perhaps the dullest, story you will hear is that it was a Roman milestone, the point from which all distances in the province of Britannia were measured. While plausible, this functional explanation feels almost insultingly mundane when held against the tapestry of myth that has grown around this stone for over 1,000 years. To truly understand its power, we must venture into the realm of esoteric belief and ancient legend. Long before the Romans arrived, the land we now call London was a place of significance to the Celtic peoples, and some theorists propose that the London Stone was originally a Druidic altar. In this view, the stone was not a mere marker, but a sacred focal point for rituals, a conduit between the earthly world and the spiritual realm, placed at a site of immense natural power. This idea connects the stone to the very bedrock of the island's pre-Roman identity. An even more compelling legend, one that fires the imagination, directly links the stone to the myth of King Arthur. The story goes that this was the stone from which the future king drew the legendary sword Excalibur, proving his divine right to rule. While the more popular version of the tale involves an anvil on a stone in a churchyard, the London Stone's claim is an old and persistent one, tying the fate of the city to the destiny of Britain's greatest mythical hero, and suggesting that London itself was the seat of a sacred, ancient kingship. Perhaps the most enduring and chilling belief, however, is the prophecy that the London Stone is a magical talisman, a protective charm upon which the very safety of the city depends. A version of the old rhyme, often attributed to the mystical poet William Blake, states, "So long as the stone of Brutus is safe, so long shall London flourish." The implication is terrifyingly simple. If the stone is ever removed, damaged, or destroyed, London itself will fall. This is not some quaint superstition. It is a belief that has demonstrably influenced the actions of both the powerful and the populace for centuries. During the Peasants' Revolt in 1381, the rebel leader Jack Cade did not march on Westminster first. He went directly to the London Stone. Upon arriving, he struck the stone with his sword and dramatically declared himself Lord of the city. This was not a random act of vandalism, it was a deeply symbolic gesture. By striking the stone, he was symbolically seizing the city's soul, asserting his authority not just over the people and the buildings, but over the very spirit of London itself. He understood the stone's power as a symbol of legitimate rule, far better than many modern historians give him credit for. The stone's physical journey through the city further illustrates its shifting yet persistent importance. For centuries, it was embedded in the wall of St. Swithin's Church on Cannon Street, an integral part of the city's fabric. Later, it was set into a stone housing in the wall itself, treated with a reverence that a simple Roman milestone would never have warranted. When the church was bombed during the Blitz in World War II, the survival of the London Stone amidst the rubble was seen by many as a miraculous fulfillment of the prophecy. London had been battered, but it had not fallen, and neither had its stone. Its various homes have always been in the historic heart of the city, its location shifting slightly, but its presence acting as a fixed point, a spiritual anchor. This was not just an artifact to be displayed in a museum, it was believed to be a living part of the city's anatomy. Even civic rituals and legal traditions grew up around it. For generations, it was a place where oaths were sworn and proclamations were made, a practice that echoes its alleged role as a Roman milestone, but also hints at something much older. Deeds and legal documents would sometimes specify that payments were to be made at the London Stone, granting the transactions an air of solemnity and permanence. This blending of the practical and the mystical is the stone's true nature. It exists at the intersection of history and legend, of law and magic. Today, encased in its modern grilled enclosure, it may look like a forgotten relic, but it represents a continuous thread of belief. It challenges the modern, rationalist view of London as a city built solely on commerce and conquest, reminding us that beneath the asphalt and steel lies a deeper, stranger foundation of myth and prophecy. The London Stone asks us a simple question: do we live in a city of bricks and mortar, or in a city of stories and spells? The fact that it still sits there, quietly watching the traffic roll by, suggests that the answer might just be both. Now, let's turn our attention from a stone that anchored the city's spirit to an object that embodies the sheer power and wealth of its first great builders. In the year 1988, during construction work for a new office building near the old Billingsgate Fish Market, archaeologists made a discovery that would send ripples through the world of Roman history. There, buried deep in the dark, wet sediments of the River Thames, they found a helmet, but this was no simple, battle-scarred infantry helmet. This was a breathtakingly ornate, ceremonial cavalry helmet, crafted from gleaming iron and covered in sheets of shimmering, finely decorated gilded silver. It was an object of immense prestige, the kind worn by a Roman cavalry officer of high rank, perhaps during military tournaments or ceremonial parades. Its discovery was remarkable enough, but the true secret of the Billingsgate helmet lies not in its beautiful, almost pristine condition, but in the perplexing question of how and why such a priceless symbol of military authority ended up at the bottom of a river. The initial, most straightforward assumption might be that it was simply lost. Perhaps an officer was crossing the Thames on a barge, a sudden gust of wind caught him, and the helmet tumbled into the water, lost forever in the murky depths. Or maybe it was stolen and then discarded by a thief. Yet, these practical explanations quickly fall apart under scrutiny. This was not just a piece of military kit, it was an object of tremendous personal and symbolic value, the equivalent of a modern-day general losing their ceremonial dress uniform and all its medals. A cavalryman's identity and social status were intimately tied to his gear, and a gilded helmet like this represented a small fortune. To lose it would be a catastrophic financial and professional blow. Furthermore, its location in the river mud was not consistent with a casual loss from a boat. It was found in a context that suggested a single, deliberate deposition, carefully placed rather than randomly dropped. This is where a far more compelling and spiritually resonant theory emerges, one that opens a fascinating window into the minds of the Romans who lived in Londinium. The helmet, many experts now believe, was not lost at all. It was a deliberate, high-status votive offering, a sacred gift to the powerful and capricious god of the river. This practice, while not as widely documented in Roman Britain as it is in other parts of the empire, has deep roots in both Roman and native Celtic spiritual traditions. For the Celts, rivers, lakes, and bogs were seen as liminal spaces, thresholds to the otherworld, and were often associated with powerful deities. The River Thames itself was likely personified as a god, perhaps named Thameses, a divine force that needed to be appeased and honored. The Romans, being remarkably pragmatic in their religious approach, frequently adopted and syncretized local gods with their own. So, the act of offering a gift to the spirit of the Thames would have made perfect sense to a Roman officer seeking favor, protection, or giving thanks. Consider the immense value of the offering itself. By throwing this magnificent helmet into the water, its owner was performing an act of staggering conspicuous consumption. He was demonstrating his wealth and piety by willingly destroying, or at least removing from human use, an object of supreme value. This was not a handful of coins or a simple brooch. This was the very symbol of his rank and his Roman identity. The offering could have been made for any number of reasons. Perhaps the officer was giving thanks for a major victory or a safe passage across the treacherous North Sea. Maybe he was seeking the gods' blessing for an upcoming campaign or petitioning for good fortune for his family back in Rome. It could even have been a terminal offering, made upon his retirement from military service, a way of returning the symbol of his power to the divine as he transitioned to a new phase of life. The sheer cost of the object communicated the depth of his devotion or the magnitude of his request. This theory fundamentally transforms the helmet from a mere archaeological artifact into a silent prayer. It provides us with an incredibly rare and intimate glimpse into the personal spirituality of the individuals who governed and lived in Roman London. We so often think of the Romans in Britannia in terms of their military might, their engineering prowess, and their administrative systems, the hard, practical facets of their civilization. The Billingsgate helmet reminds us that they were also a profoundly spiritual people, living in a world inhabited by gods and spirits that demanded recognition. This single object, pulled from the mud, suggests a scene of powerful solemnity, a high-ranking Roman officer, standing on the banks of the Thames, perhaps with a priest in attendance, ritually consigning his most prized possession to the watery depths as a sacrifice to a power he believed was even greater than the empire he served. It's a humbling image that complicates our view of the Romans as purely pragmatic conquerors, revealing their vulnerability and their need to connect with the unseen forces that governed their lives and their fortunes in a foreign land. From the spiritual offering of a Roman helmet, we move to a very different kind of monument, one that sought to showcase not divine power, but the absolute power of human scientific understanding, or at least, what the Victorians believed that understanding to be. In the leafy South London suburb of Sydenham, nestled around a peaceful lake in a corner of the park that bears its name, stands a menagerie of stone beasts. These are the Crystal Palace dinosaurs, a collection of over 30 sculptures of prehistoric animals and extinct mammals. To the modern eye, they might look charmingly quaint, even a little comical, with their stout, bulky bodies and strangely placid expressions. But to see them as mere follies or decorative oddities is to miss their true, revolutionary significance. These were the world's first ever full-scale models of dinosaurs and other prehistoric creatures, and they were built with a secret, highly ambitious agenda that went far beyond public education. The creator of these concrete giants was the artist and sculptor Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins, but the intellectual force behind them was the formidable anatomist Sir Richard Owen. It was Owen, in fact, who had coined the very term Dinosauria, meaning terrible lizard, just a decade earlier, establishing himself as Britain's leading authority on these newly discovered ancient reptiles. The sculptures were commissioned in the 1850s as a permanent attraction for the relocated Crystal Palace, a cathedral of industry and progress that had been moved from its original site, hosting the Great Exhibition. This context is crucial. The models were not created in a scientific vacuum. They were a public relations masterpiece designed to visually cement Britain's, and more specifically Richard Owen's, dominance in the burgeoning, competitive field of paleontology. This was a time of intense national and personal rivalry, particularly with American scientists like Edward Drinker Cope and Othniel Charles Marsh, who were uncovering their own spectacular finds. The Crystal Palace Park was to be a walk-through testament to British scientific superiority. Hawkins worked under Owen's close supervision, using the best available fossil evidence to reconstruct these lost worlds. But herein lies the fascinating secret of these sculptures. They are not accurate reconstructions by today's standards. Instead, they are a perfect time capsule of the brilliant, yet deeply flawed, scientific assumptions of the 1850s. The most glaring example is the portrayal of the iguanodon. The initial fossil discoveries of this dinosaur included a mysterious, pointed bone that was logically interpreted as a horn, which you can clearly see placed on the snout of the Crystal Palace model, making it look like a prehistoric rhinoceros. We now know this bone was actually a modified thumb spike, a weapon or a tool, not a nasal horn. This single error fundamentally shaped the animal's entire posture and demeanor. Furthermore, the models are universally depicted as massive, barrel-chested, elephantine creatures, walking with a sprawling gait or standing like heavy, ponderous reptiles. This was based on Owen's influential view of dinosaurs not as active, dynamic animals, but as colossal, cold-blooded brutes, the ultimate products of a reptilian lineage that represented a different, and in his mind inferior, form of life compared to mammals. This elephantine aesthetic was a deliberate artistic and scientific choice. Owen believed these creatures were the pinnacle of reptilian development, and he envisioned them as majestic, slow-moving behemoths. By making them look like monumental, stately creatures, Hawkins and Owen were making a philosophical statement. They were presenting dinosaurs not as bizarre monsters, but as noble, almost regal ancestors that fit a Victorian sense of order and grandeur. The Megalosaurus stands with a powerful, lizard-like stance, its tail dragging, its body heavy with muscle. The marine reptiles, like the ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, are shown as sleek but powerful inhabitants of the deep, reflecting the Victorian fascination with the mysteries of the ocean. Every sculptural decision was filtered through this lens of controlled magnificence, designed to inspire awe rather than fear, and to reinforce Owen's specific scientific theories to a public eager for wonders. The legacy of these sculptures is profoundly double-edged. On one hand, they were a monumental achievement in public science communication. For the first time, people could walk among and physically comprehend the scale of prehistoric life. They ignited the imaginations of countless Victorians, including a young Arthur Conan Doyle, and they brought the abstract concept of deep time into tangible reality. For decades, they were what dinosaurs looked like in the public consciousness. On the other hand, they also fossilized a set of scientific errors that would take nearly a century to correct. The image of the slow, stupid, swamp-dwelling dinosaur, an image popularized by these very statues, became deeply entrenched in popular culture, hindering the acceptance of later discoveries that revealed dinosaurs as likely active, agile, and potentially warm-blooded animals. The Crystal Palace dinosaurs, therefore, are far more than just outdated models. They are a powerful reminder that science is not a steady march of accumulating facts, but a messy, human process of interpretation, debate, and sometimes stubborn adherence to flawed ideas. They show us how easily a hypothesis, when cast in concrete and backed by a powerful authority, can become, for a time, unshakable truth. Just a few years after the Crystal Palace, dinosaurs were reshaping public understanding of the ancient past. Another discovery was being made in the very heart of London that would reveal a different kind of ancient world entirely. one of secret rituals and forbidden gods. In September 1954, construction workers were preparing the site for a new modernist office building for the Bloomerg Company on Walbrook, a street deep in the city of London, when their machinery hit stone. Not just any stone, but the foundations of a beautifully preserved Roman temple, complete with intricate flooring and a haunting, almost life-sized sculpture of the god it was dedicated to, Mithras. The public frenzy was immediate and overwhelming. Here was a spectacular window into Roman London, a place of worship for a mysterious, soldierly cult that rivaled early Christianity. Newspapers splashed the story across their front pages, and thousands of Londoners queued for hours, day after day, to catch a glimpse of the ruins, a tangible connection to their city's distant, cosmopolitan origins. This public adoration, however, set the stage for a profound and deeply controversial secret that has haunted the temple ever since. The discovery created an immense conflict between the demands of archaeology and the relentless pressure of post-war commercial development. The site developers, wielding their legal permits and facing tight construction schedules, were not pleased with the delay. A compromise was hastily brokered by the government's Ministry of Works, one that would prioritize speed over scientific rigor. The decision was made to conduct a rescue excavation, a term that sounds heroic, but in this case meant a frantic, rushed dig with a primary goal of recovering the most visually impressive artifacts and recording the basic plan of the building before it was dismantled to make way for the new construction. This process, which lasted a mere few weeks, was led by the renowned archaeologist Professor W. F. Grimes, who did his best under near impossible circumstances. But the pace was so breakneck that the meticulous, layer-by-layer analysis that defines modern archaeology was simply impossible. The context, the precise stratigraphy, the relationship of objects to each other in the soil, the subtle evidence of how the temple was used and modified over centuries, was largely destroyed in the race to clear the site. The consequence of this rushed effort is that we lost an incalculable amount of information forever. Think of an archaeological site not just as a collection of objects, but as a three-dimensional history book. The temple wasn't a single moment in time. It was built, modified, repaired, and rebuilt over hundreds of years. The soil layers, or strata, held the key to this timeline. A coin found in the foundation trench could date the initial construction. A layer of ash might indicate a fire and subsequent rebuilding. The specific placement of ritual objects could reveal the precise choreography of a Mithraic ceremony. Because the excavation was so hurried, this delicate page-by-page reading of the site was torn apart. Pottery shards, animal bones from feasts, and tiny personal items like beads were often swept up and discarded as backfill, their stories never told. We gained the temple's basic blueprint and its stunning sculptures, but we lost the nuanced narrative of its daily life, its congregation, and its evolution. This has left enormous gaps in our understanding. We don't know for certain when it was first founded, exactly how it fell out of use, or the full sequence of its architectural changes. The controversy only deepened with the next chapter of the temple's story, its reconstruction. After the excavation, the public outcry to preserve this piece of history was so strong that the ruins couldn't simply be lost. The solution was to relocate the entire structure, but the chosen site, just 100 meters away on Queen Victoria Street, was not the temple's original location. More problematically, the reconstruction, completed in 1962, was not an exact replica. The materials used were modern concrete and reconstituted stone, giving it a clean, almost sterile appearance that contrasts sharply with the weathered authenticity of truly ancient ruins. The layout was based on the plan recovered by Grimes, but the interpretation was heavily influenced by 1950s sensibilities and a limited understanding of Mithraism. The most significant liberty taken was the orientation of the central aisle, or nave. Mithraic temples, known as Mithraea, were traditionally built to be subterranean or cave-like, symbolizing the grotto where Mithras slew the cosmic bull. They were also meticulously aligned to capture a specific beam of sunlight on significant dates, much like the later Christian churches that may have borrowed the concept. The reconstructed temple's alignment is widely considered by many contemporary archaeologists to be incorrect, a best guess based on the incomplete evidence available at the time. So, what we see today is essentially a modern monument inspired by a Roman original. It is a powerful and evocative symbol, to be sure, but it is a product of the 1950s and 60s as much as it is of the 3rd century. This raises a deeply philosophical question for anyone interested in historical preservation. Is a well-intentioned reconstruction that gets some details wrong better than having no temple at all? The reconstructed Temple of Mithras allows millions of people to physically grasp the scale and atmosphere of a Roman place of worship. It makes the invisible past visible. Yet it also presents a sanitized, partially fictionalized version of history. It lacks the soot, the wear, the patina of ages, and the precise spiritual geometry that would have been so vital to its original worshippers. It stands as a permanent reminder of a pivotal moment when London had to choose between its future and its past, and in the compromise, created a new kind of artifact, one whose true origin is not merely Roman, but a direct consequence of 20th century ambition, public passion, and archaeological haste. But to truly explore the hidden dimensions of the city's past, we must now shift our gaze from physical objects you can touch in a museum to something entirely more ethereal, the invisible lines of energy that some believe crisscross the landscape, converging with powerful intensity right here in London. This brings us to the fascinating and controversial concept of the so-called London vortex, a web of mystical pathways known as ley lines. Unlike the hammer or the hoard, these aren't tangible artifacts you can hold. They are theoretical alignments said to connect ancient sites, monuments, and natural landmarks across great distances. Proponents of this idea suggest that powerful centers of Earth energy exist where these lines intersect, and that London, far from being a random Roman trading post, was deliberately built upon one of the most potent of these vortices in all of Europe, with landmarks like St. Paul's Cathedral and the Tower of London acting as mighty anchors on this celestial grid. The story of ley lines, however, begins not in the mists of prehistory, but in the much more recent past of the early 20th century. The man responsible for launching this idea into the popular imagination was an English amateur archaeologist and photographer named Alfred Watkins. In the year 1921, while looking at a map of the Herefordshire countryside, Watkins experienced a sudden moment of revelation. He saw what he described as a network of straight lines connecting ancient mounds, old churches built on pagan sites, standing stones, and even ancient ford crossings on rivers. He called these alignments leys, from an Old English word for a cleared strip of land, and he published his theories in a book titled The Old Straight Track. For Watkins, these lines were not magical or energetic. His initial theory was decidedly practical. He believed they were ancient trading routes or navigational tracks, established in the Neolithic era and marked by prominent landmarks to help travelers find their way across a vast and trackless landscape. His was a theory of prehistoric surveying and commerce, not of earth mysteries or psychic energy. The transformation of Watkins's practical tracks into channels of mystical power is where the story takes a significant turn. After his death, other writers and researchers, particularly in the 1960s and 70s, took his basic concept and infused it with spiritual and esoteric meaning. Influenced by concepts from Chinese Feng Shui and its dragon lines, as well as various New Age philosophies, these new interpreters proposed that ley lines were not just old roads, but actual currents of a subtle, terrestrial energy that flows through the planet. They argued that our ancestors, being more attuned to the natural world, could sense this energy and purposely built their sacred site stone circles, burial mounds, and later, churches, at the points where this power was most concentrated. This is the genesis of the idea of a London vortex. The theory suggests that the city's major historical sites are not randomly placed, but are carefully positioned nodes on this powerful energetic grid. St. Paul's Cathedral, sitting on one of the highest points in the city, is often cited as a major nexus point. The Tower of London, with its deep, ancient foundations, is another. Even the precise layout of the city's oldest streets is sometimes analyzed for potential geometric alignments that might follow these hidden pathways. So, how does mainstream archaeology and history view these captivating claims? The scholarly consensus is overwhelmingly skeptical, if not entirely dismissive. The primary criticism is one of statistical probability. When you have a landscape as densely packed with ancient and historical sites as the British Isles, finding straight lines that connect 3 or 4 points is not only possible, it's almost inevitable. Critics have repeatedly demonstrated that if you take a map with enough points on it, be they churches, old stones, or hill forts, you can draw any number of seemingly significant straight lines between them purely by chance. It's a classic case of apophenia, the human tendency to perceive meaningful patterns within random data. Furthermore, there is no archaeological evidence, no artifacts, no preserved road surfaces, no contemporary written records that supports the existence of a culture capable of, or interested in, surveying and maintaining a vast, island-wide network of perfectly straight tracks across miles of difficult terrain. The practical challenges of creating and using such rigidly straight paths over hills and through forests make Watkins's original theory highly improbable from an engineering perspective. This is not to say, however, that all prehistoric alignments are pure fantasy. There is a crucial distinction to be made between the modern, esoteric concept of energy carrying ley lines and the genuine, demonstrable astronomical alignments found at specific ancient sites. The most famous example is, of course, Stonehenge, which is precisely aligned to the solstice sunrises and sunsets. This was clearly an intentional act by its builders, reflecting a deep understanding of celestial cycles and a desire to embed that knowledge into their architecture. These are site-specific, locally significant orientations, not parts of a vast, interconnected national grid. In London, any apparent alignments between older sites are far more likely to be the result of topography, building on high ground for defense or along natural ridges for ease of travel, or simple coincidence born from centuries of urban development layered upon itself. This enduring appeal of the ley line theory, despite the lack of scientific evidence, reveals something profound about our relationship with the past and the landscape. In our modern, hyper-rational world, the idea of an invisible, energetic geography offers a sense of enchantment and mystery. It suggests that the land itself has a story, a hidden power that our ancestors understood and we have forgotten. It transforms a simple walk through the city into a potential pilgrimage, where every ancient church or old stone might be part of a grand, hidden design. The London Vortex is ultimately a powerful narrative, a myth for the modern age that allows us to see the city not just as a collection of buildings, but as a living, breathing entity with a secret, spiritual anatomy. It may not be archaeology in the academic sense, but it is a testament to our enduring desire to find meaning, pattern, and magic in the world around us, connecting us to a past that feels more mysterious and alive than the history books alone can ever convey. Now we move from the invisible grid of ley lines to a structure of breathtaking solidity and beauty, a single surviving wall that speaks volumes about a seismic shift in English history. Standing on the south bank of the Thames, near the modern Borough Market, is a magnificent, skeletal window frame of golden stone, towering over the urban landscape. This is the Great Rose Window of Winchester Palace, all that remains of the lavish London residence of the bishops of Winchester. To see it today, isolated and exposed to the elements, you might think it a tragic ruin, a victim of time's relentless decay. But the truth is far more deliberate. The story of this window is not one of accidental loss, but of calculated destruction, and its origin is rooted in a time when the church wielded power so immense it could stare across the river at the Tower of London and not even blink. To understand this palace, we must first understand the man who built it and the office he held. The Bishop of Winchester was no ordinary clergyman. For centuries, he was one of the richest and most powerful men in the kingdom, a prince of the church in the most literal sense. His diocese, located in the prosperous south of England, generated colossal wealth, primarily from the wool trade, but his influence extended far beyond his geographical bishopric. He held a unique and powerful position as the king's bishop, often serving as the royal treasurer or a key political advisor. This placed him at the very heart of secular power, a constant fixture in the royal court. The decision to build a grand palace in Southwark, just across the river from the city of London, was a masterstroke of political theater. It was a statement of presence, a declaration that the church was not separate from the world of kings and commerce, but an integral, dominant player within it. The palace itself, when intact, was a complex designed to impress and intimidate. It wasn't just a private home. It was a center of administration, a court of law for the liberty of the clink, a vast area under the bishop's direct legal control, and a venue for lavish entertaining that could host kings and queens. The Great Hall, where this magnificent rose window once poured light onto feasting dignitaries, was built on a scale to rival any royal hall in the land. Its dimensions were staggering, and the rose window was its crowning glory. In the medieval mind, light was not just illumination, it was a metaphor for the divine. A window like this, with its intricate stone tracery radiating outwards like the petals of a flower or the rays of the sun, was a physical representation of God's light shining upon the bishop's works. It symbolized enlightenment, heavenly favor, and the cosmic order that the church claimed to represent and uphold. Every guest, from a visiting monarch to a supplicant merchant, would have entered this hall and been immediately overwhelmed by the display of spiritual and temporal power fused into architecture. This fusion of divine right and earthly authority is the true secret of the window's origin. It was built not merely for beauty, but as a bulwark of an institution that saw itself as equal, and in some matters superior, to the crown. The church in pre-Reformation England was a state within a state. It had its own laws, its own courts, its own taxes, and vast tracts of land. It could make or break a king's policies through its influence and wealth. The Bishop of Winchester, from his Thames side palace, was a guardian of this formidable edifice. The palace and its glorious window were a constant, stone and glass reminder to the monarchy across the water that there was another power in the realm, one that answered to a higher authority in Rome. For centuries, this delicate, often tense, balance of power held. The monarchy and the church were intertwined, sometimes partners, sometimes rivals, but always acknowledging each other's sovereign spheres. This precarious balance was utterly shattered in the 16th century by King Henry VIII and his break with Rome. The English Reformation wasn't just a theological dispute. It was a political and land grab of unprecedented scale. The church's immense wealth and independence were a direct threat to the Tudor king's ambition for absolute power. The dissolution of the monasteries was the first dramatic act, but it was followed by the systematic dismantling of all symbols of the old church's authority. Winchester Palace, as a potent symbol of a bishop who owed his ultimate allegiance to the Pope, became a target. Its destruction was not an act of random mob violence during a riot, though it may have been damaged in one. The palace's decline was a deliberate, state-sanctioned process. It was seized, its lands and revenues confiscated by the crown, and its buildings were gradually stripped of their valuables and repurposed for secular use, eventually falling into the dilapidation we see today. The survival of the rose window wall is almost ironic. It stands not as a testament to the palace's glory, but as a monument to its deliberate downfall. That single wall, with its empty eye looking out over the Thames, is a silent witness to one of the most profound revolutions in English history. It marks the moment when the crown decisively subjugated the church, ending its role as a separate power base and bringing it under state control. The light that once streamed through that window, symbolizing divine sanction for the bishop's power, was effectively extinguished by royal decree. So, when you look at the Winchester Palace rose window, you are not just looking at a beautiful piece of medieval architecture. You are looking at the ghost of a broken partnership, a symbol of a power struggle that reshaped a nation, and a stark reminder that the most beautiful structures can be brought low not by time, but by the shifting tides of politics and belief. But among all these stories of Roman wealth and medieval power, it's easy to forget that London's history stretches back millennia before the first legionary ever set foot on the riverbank. To uncover a secret from that truly ancient world, we must travel to the city's far eastern edge, to the borough of Havering. Here, in 2018, metal detectorists made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the archaeological community. the largest Bronze Age hoard ever found in London. We're not talking about a handful of coins or a few broken weapons. This was a massive collection, over 450 objects, including axe heads, spearheads, fragments of swords, and a huge quantity of broken metal, known as ingots and rawhide-shaped objects, all carefully buried together. The sheer volume of metal represents an almost unimaginable fortune for its time, a fortune that was deliberately taken out of circulation and hidden in the earth. The official explanation often given for such finds is a simple, catch-all term, a ritual deposit. The idea is that our ancestors buried valuable metal as an offering to their gods, a sacrifice to ensure a good harvest or divine favor. Another common theory is that it was buried for safekeeping, a prehistoric piggy bank hidden in a time of trouble with the full intention of being dug up later. But with a hoard of this staggering size, these generic explanations feel unsatisfying. The secret of the Havering hoard isn't just that it exists, it's the specific, dramatic story of crisis and survival that its unique composition forces us to imagine. To unlock this story, we need to look closely at what was actually in the ground. The hoard wasn't a single, uniform collection. It was buried in 4 separate, but closely spaced, deposits. This detail is our first major clue. It suggests this wasn't a single, panicked act, but a series of deliberate, considered actions. Perhaps the owner was returning to the spot repeatedly, adding to their hidden wealth over time, or maybe they were segregating different types of material for a specific purpose. The objects themselves tell an even more compelling tale. We find complete, usable items, beautifully cast socketed axe heads that were the multi-tools of their day, used for everything from woodworking to warfare. Alongside these finished tools, however, was a huge amount of raw material. Broken swords, battered blades, and those distinctive lumps of bronze shaped like dried animal hides, which were a standard form of currency and raw metal across Bronze Age Europe. This mix is crucial. It isn't just a personal toolkit or a warrior's armory, it's a portfolio. It's the complete assets of a person, or more likely a community, at a very specific moment in time. The functional tools for the present, the valuable scrap metal for future trade, and the raw material for creating what comes next. This evidence opens the door to several vivid and specific scenarios that go far beyond a simple ritual offering. One of the most gripping possibilities is that this was the treasury of a local chieftain. In the late Bronze Age, around 3,000 years ago, society was organized around powerful tribal leaders who derived their status from controlling resources, especially metal. This hoard could represent the accumulated wealth and power of such a leader, a person who commanded loyalty through their ability to provide bronze for tools and weapons. But power always attracts rivals. What if this chieftain got word of an impending raid from a neighboring tribe, or perhaps the arrival of seaborne raiders coming up the Thames? Burying the tribe's entire wealth would have been a desperate, strategic move to deny the invaders their prize and preserve the community's means of recovery after the danger had passed. The fact that it was never recovered adds a layer of profound tragedy to this theory. Did the chieftain and his people fall in the ensuing conflict? Were they driven from their land, their secret dying with them? The earth holds the answer, but gives up only the treasure, not the fate of those who left it there. Another, equally plausible theory casts the owner not as a chieftain, but as a master metalsmith. In the Bronze Age, a skilled smith was more than a craftsman. He was a technological wizard, a vital and revered member of the community who held the knowledge to transform raw stone and metal into the very substance of civilization. This immense collection of raw ingots and broken objects could represent his life's work, his stock in trade, his raw materials, and his finished goods, all in one place. So why would he bury it? Consider the context of the time. The late Bronze Age was a period of significant climate change and social upheaval. Evidence suggests there were periods of severe drought and famine. In such desperate times, a community might fracture. The social contracts that protected a smith and provided him with food in exchange for his work could have completely broken down. Facing starvation or violence from his own neighbors, the smith might have chosen to hide his invaluable stock, intending to return when times were better. He was safeguarding not just metal, but the very knowledge and means of production that would allow his community, or a new one, to rebuild. The failure to retrieve it suggests a personal catastrophe, a silent story of an individual's hope, extinguished by the harsh realities of a world in crisis. What makes the Havering Hoard so uniquely powerful is that it allows us to move beyond abstract theories and touch the raw nerve of a human experience thousands of years removed from our own. It isn't a king's ransom of gold and jewels meant for display. It is the foundational currency of a functioning society, the very stuff of survival and status. When we look at those axe heads, we can see the farmer clearing land to feed his family. When we see the spear tips, we feel the anxiety of a community guarding its territory. And when we see the piles of broken metal and ingots, we recognize the ambition of a trader or a smith building a future. Its burial marks a moment when that normal life was profoundly interrupted. Whether by the threat of invasion, the collapse of the social order, or the desperation of famine, someone made a conscious decision to take all of this potential, all of this security, and commit it to the ground. The Havering Hoard's secret is not a single, simple answer, but a window into the precariousness of life in prehistoric Britain. It reminds us that the drive to protect what we value most, and the tragedy of dreams left unfulfilled, are human constants, etched not in stone, but in bronze and buried for the future to find. Our journey now descends from Bronze Age treasures and mystical stones into the very bowels of the city, to an underworld of Victorian engineering so vast and ambitious it literally reshaped the ground beneath London's feet. Here, in a cathedral-like building at Crossness in southeast London, reside the beam engine's colossal, beautiful machines of cast iron and polished brass. So ornate they look like the industrial fantasies of a steampunk novelist. These leviathans, named Prince Consort, Victoria, Albert Edward, and Alexandra, were not created for ornamentation, but for a purpose so urgent and visceral it threatened to bring the entire British Empire to its knees. They were built to pump the city's sewage. Their origin is a story of political paralysis, scientific controversy, and a summer so foul it forced a nation to confront its own waste, a crisis forever known as the Great Stink. To understand why these magnificent engines were necessary, you must first picture the state of London in the mid-19th century. The city was the heart of a global empire, a teeming metropolis of over 2 million people, but its infrastructure was medieval. There was no coordinated sewer system. Human waste was typically collected in cesspits beneath homes, which frequently overflowed, leaking their contents into the soil and the cellars of the poor. What liquid waste there was often flowed through open gutters in the streets, eventually finding its way into the River Thames, which essentially functioned as the city's open, flowing sewer. The river was a toxic, churning soup of industrial runoff, slaughterhouse offal, and raw human excrement. The situation was not just unpleasant, it was a public health catastrophe waiting for a trigger. That trigger was the weather. The summer of 1858 was exceptionally hot and dry. For weeks, the sun beat down on the Thames, baking the vast quantities of raw sewage into a concentrated, gaseous miasma. The stench that rose from the river was so overpowering, so utterly unbearable, that it permeated every corner of the city, but it reached its most potent concentration just downstream from the Houses of Parliament, whose windows overlooked the river. This was the Great Stink, and it became a political weapon of unparalleled force. The politicians and lords inside the Palace of Westminster found their work completely paralyzed. They tried to block the smell by soaking the curtains in chloride of lime, but the effort was futile. The stench was inescapable, a physical presence that made debate and governance impossible. For years, the city's various sanitation boards had been arguing over the colossal cost and immense engineering challenge of building a proper sewer system. Proposals were debated, amended, and shelved, but in the face of this olfactory assault, political will was forged almost overnight. The crisis was so immediate and so personally offensive to the ruling class that Parliament passed the necessary legislation for a comprehensive metropolitan sewer system in just 18 days, a breathtaking speed for any government. The Great Stink proved that a public health crisis could be ignored until it literally reached the noses of those in power. The man entrusted with this Herculean task was the chief engineer of the Metropolitan Board of Works, Joseph Bazalgette. His plan was one of breathtaking simplicity and staggering scale. He designed a system that would intercept the old, overflowing sewers before they reached the Thames. These new, giant interceptor sewers, built with over 300 million bricks, would run parallel to the river, collecting the waste and channeling it by gravity eastwards, away from the central city. But here lay the final, critical problem of topography. London is mostly flat as it approaches the Thames estuary. Gravity alone could not lift the colossal volume of sewage high enough to be discharged into the river at a point where the tide would carry it out to sea. This is where the beam engines came in. They were the powerful hearts of the system. The sewage would flow into massive holding reservoirs at Crossness and its sister station at Abbey Mills. Then, at the appointed time, these steam-powered behemoths would roar to life. Their massive beams, weighing over 40 tons each, would seesaw up and down, driving powerful pumps that would lift the accumulated sewage up into a high-level outfall pipe, from which it could be flushed into the Thames on the ebb tide. The engineering was revolutionary, but it was built upon a controversial and, as it turned out, partially mistaken scientific theory. The prevailing medical wisdom of the day was the miasma theory, which held that diseases like cholera were spread through foul-smelling air, or miasma. This was the very logic that had driven Parliament to act during the Great Stink, the belief that the smell itself was the killer. Bazalgette himself seems to have subscribed to this view. A competing theory, known as the germ theory, was in its infancy. A physician named John Snow had famously demonstrated during a cholera outbreak in Soho in 1854 that the disease was waterborne, tracing it to a single contaminated water pump. But Snow's findings were largely dismissed by the medical establishment. The fascinating, almost paradoxical, outcome is that Bazalgette, working from the incorrect miasma theory, designed a system that inadvertently solved the real, waterborne problem. By diverting raw sewage away from the Thames, he was also preventing it from contaminating the water supply, as many water companies drew their drinking water directly from the heavily polluted river. His sewer system, built to eliminate a smell, actually broke the cycle of waterborne disease, leading to a dramatic and almost immediate drop in cholera deaths in London. It was a monumental victory for public health, achieved through brilliant engineering that was guided by flawed, yet ultimately productive, science. The Crossness beam engines, therefore, are far more than just impressive machines. They are the culmination of a societal transformation, physical manifestations of the moment when a modern city decided to take responsibility for the health of its citizens. They represent a triumph of political will born from crisis, the application of raw industrial power to a human problem, and the happy accident of scientific progress. When you stand before them today, restored to their gleaming, polished glory, you are not just looking at steam engines. You are looking at the machines that saved a city, the direct answer to a summer of stench that cleared the air and, more importantly, cleansed the water for millions. They mark the origin of modern public health engineering, a testament to the idea that the greatest civic wonders are sometimes the ones we never see, working silently below our feet to keep us safe. Yet, as we pull ourselves from the city's subterranean wonders, our search for London's secrets now propels us outwards, to a windswept field in Suffolk, and a discovery that would fundamentally rewrite our understanding of early England. In 1939, on the eve of World War, an archaeologist named Basil Brown unearthed the ghost of a king within the great ship burial at Sutton Hoo. The soil yielded a treasure beyond imagining: golden regalia, intricate jewelry, and the shattered yet breathtaking remains of a warrior's helmet. This magnificent object, with its fierce face mask and elaborate dagger, has become an icon of the Anglo-Saxon world, a symbol of a king's power and the artistry of a time once dismissed as barbaric. For decades, it was understood as a masterpiece of East Anglian craft, a product of the local kingdom where it was laid to rest. But a compelling and transformative theory now challenges this provincial origin, suggesting that the helmet, or one so like it as to be its twin, was not born in the Suffolk countryside, but was forged in a royal workshop right here in London. This idea hinges on a meticulous analysis of the helmet's artistic language. The style is not a simple, local folk art. It is an international language of power. a fusion of influences known as insular art. We see the intricate, interwoven patterns of Celtic metalwork, the stylized animal figures of Germanic traditions, and, most tellingly, the classical motifs of the late Roman world. This sophisticated blending didn't happen in a vacuum. It required a cosmopolitan center, a place where different cultures, traders, and ideas converge. In the 7th century, the walled Roman city of Londinium, though much reduced, was precisely such a place. It was not the deserted ruin we often imagine in the so-called Dark Ages. Instead, it was a bustling emporium, a designated trading port where goods and craftsmen from across Europe and beyond met. Frankish merchants from Gaul, Frisian traders from the North Sea, and even delegates from the Byzantine East would have passed through its gates, bringing with them artistic styles and technical knowledge. A royal workshop in London would have had access to this rich stew of influences, making it the perfect incubator for an object as stylistically complex as the Sutton Hoo helmet. The materials themselves whisper of far-flung connections that London was uniquely positioned to facilitate. The helmet's core is iron, but its glory lies in the thin, stamped panels of silver and bronze that cover its surface, depicting warriors and mythological scenes. The garnets that stud its surface, creating a dazzling, blood-red glow, were sourced from as far away as India and Sri Lanka. Procuring these specific gems, cutting them with incredible precision, and setting them in intricate cloisonné cells required a trade network of immense reach and sophistication. London, with its established position on the Thames as a gateway to the continent, was the natural hub for such luxury imports. A local East Anglian king could certainly afford such treasures, but it is far more likely that the raw materials, and perhaps even the master craftsmen who worked them, were centered in London, the primary commercial engine of the land. This theory radically repositioned 7th century London. It was not a backwater, but a vital center of production and power. Historical sources, like the chronicler Bede, refer to London as the capital of the East Saxon Kingdom, a place of great resort of merchants and merchandise from all nations. A royal workshop here would not have served just one king, but would have been a resource for multiple aspiring rulers across Britain, producing prestige items to legitimize their rule. The King of East Anglia, buried at Sutton Hoo, was likely a client of this London-based power structure. By commissioning or acquiring a helmet of such unparalleled quality from the London workshop, he was doing more than just arming himself. He was making a profound political statement. He was wrapping himself in the authority of a still potent Roman urban center, aligning himself with international trade routes, and proclaiming his sophistication and status to rival kings. The helmet was less a piece of military equipment and more a crown, a symbol of cosmopolitan kingship sourced from the most advanced manufacturing center in Britain. Ultimately, the Sutton Hoo helmet, even sitting in a museum in Suffolk, tells a secret story about London. It forces us to discard the term Dark Ages and see this period as one of dynamic rebirth and connection. The theory of its London origin paints a picture of a city that never truly fell, but rather transformed from a Roman administrative capital into an early medieval economic and artistic powerhouse. The ghost in the soil at Sutton Hoo, therefore, is not just the spirit of a forgotten king, but the specter of London's enduring significance, a city that has always known how to craft power, beauty, and legend, and then send them out into the world to shape history. But for a secret that lies not in a single object, but in the very fabric of a building, we travel to the London borough of Greenwich, to a place that holds two distinct histories within its walls. This is Eltham Palace, and its centerpiece is the Great Hall, a magnificent structure of soaring medieval timber and stone. Its origin is royal, built in the 15th century for King Edward IV as part of a favored hunting lodge, a place where monarchs like Henry VIII spent their childhoods. Walking into this hall, you would naturally expect to be transported back to the world of chivalry and courtly intrigue. The hammer beam roof is a masterpiece of carpentry. The stained glass casts colorful patterns on the stone floor, and the minstrel's gallery whispers of feasts and festivities. This is the story the hall itself seems to tell at first glance, but the true, breathtaking secret of Eltham Palace is what happens when you turn away from the hall and step through an unassuming doorway, entering a world that is not medieval at all, but a stunning, pristine monument to 1930s Art Deco luxury, a time capsule of one family's radical vision for living with the past. This astonishing transformation is the work of Stephen and Virginia Courtauld, heirs to a vast fortune from the Courtaulds' textile empire. In the 1930s, they acquired the then dilapidated palace, not to restore it as a museum piece, but to create their own personal and intensely modern home. They made a revolutionary decision that would horrify many purists today. They chose not to merely preserve the medieval hall, but to build a brand new, lavish residence directly onto its side, creating a seamless, and yet utterly jarring, fusion of centuries. The Courtaulds were not typical aristocrats clinging to tradition. They were wealthy, progressive industrialists with a passion for modern art, design, and technology. Their project was a bold statement about how England's heritage could be repurposed, not as a relic to be venerated from a distance, but as a foundation for a new, cutting-edge way of life. They saw the crumbling palace not as a sacred ruin, but as a magnificent canvas for their own aesthetic ambitions. The house they built is a symphony of Art Deco elegance, a showcase for the most advanced materials and design principles of the era. As you move from the medieval gloom of the Great Hall, you enter a breathtaking entrance hall that feels like stepping onto the set of a sleek, ocean liner-inspired film. The room is dominated by a spectacular circular carpet, its geometric pattern radiating outwards and above, a magnificent domed roof lined with glowing alabaster panels, lit from within to create a soft, heavenly radiance. The materials are a deliberate celebration of the modern. Sleek-figured maple paneling covers the walls, polished chrome and glass gleam from every fixture, and exotic woods like amboina and rosewood are used for furniture and doors. Every detail, from the geometric patterns in the marble floors to the sleek, streamlined curves of the stairwell, was meticulously planned to embody the spirit of the age, an age of speed, progress, and sophisticated glamour. This was not just a showpiece, it was a truly modern home, packed with technological innovations that were the height of luxury in the 1930s. The Courtaulds installed a central vacuum cleaning system, an internal telephone network, and a sophisticated loudspeaker system that could pipe gramophone music throughout the house. The bathrooms were temples of chrome and glass, with multi-jet showers and coordinated fittings that would still be considered luxurious today. Virginia Courtauld's walk-in wardrobe was a masterpiece of organizational design, with specially lit cabinets for her furs and dozens of meticulously arranged drawers. Perhaps the most famous resident, besides the family themselves, was their pet lemur, Mahjong, who had his own heated, custom-designed cage within the house, complete with a tree trunk for climbing. This attention to detail for even their pet underscores the almost limitless budget and the eccentric, personal vision that drove the entire project. The house was a machine for living, but a machine of unparalleled beauty and comfort. The genius and the secret tension of Eltham lies in this deliberate, jarring juxtaposition. The architects, Seeley and Paget, did not try to mimic the medieval style. They created a stark, honest contrast, allowing the two eras to stand side by side in a conversation across time. You can stand in the Great Hall, feeling the weight of 500 years of history in the massive timber beams, and then, through a single doorway, glimpse the sleek, golden glow of the maple-paneled dining room. This was a deliberate philosophical choice. The Courtaulds were not erasing the past, they were engaging with it, building their own chapter directly onto its spine. Their home acknowledges the medieval structure as a cherished part of the property's story, but refuses to be constrained by it. It represents a moment in the 20th century when a new kind of English elite, one born of industry, not inheritance, felt confident enough to imprint their own, radically contemporary identity onto the historic landscape. Ultimately, Eltham Palace is a unique and powerful time capsule, but not of any single era. It is a capsule of a specific moment in the 1930s, capturing the optimism, the luxury, and the sheer audacity of pre-war modernism. It freezes the aesthetic of a wealthy, cultured, and slightly eccentric couple who believed that the best way to honor history was not to pickle it, but to live alongside it, enhancing it with the very best of their own present. The palace's secret is this layered identity. It is not a medieval castle with a modern wing, nor is it a modern house with a quaint old hall attached. It is a single, cohesive entity that challenges our conventional categories of old and new. It asks us whether preservation must always mean returning a building to a single point in its history, or whether the most vibrant preservation is sometimes a continuous, creative, and even disruptive act of reinvention. The Courtaulds left behind more than a home. They left a question, carved in stone, timber, and polished maple, about who gets to write the next chapter in the story of a place. But standing before the sleek modernity of Eltham Palace, it's easy to forget that London's history is not just written in stone and steel, but carved in wood and launched upon the sea. For a city built on a river, its most powerful secrets often sailed into port, and one such secret is preserved in the unlikeliest of places, a school. Tucked away on the grounds of the London Nautical School is a massive, weathered wooden figurehead, the silent, sculpted face of a 19th century merchant vessel. It depicts a classical woman, her features worn soft by salt and wind, her gaze fixed on some distant horizon only she can see. To a casual observer, it is a beautiful relic of the age of sail, a proud emblem of maritime adventure. But the true story of the ship she once adorned pulls back the curtain on a far more complex and uncomfortable chapter of London's global reach, one that connects this serene wooden face directly to the brutal realities of the opium trade and the human cargo of indentured labor. The vessel this figurehead called home was not a naval frigate or a royal explorer's ship. It was a merchantman, a workhorse of Victorian commerce. Its name, now often forgotten, would have been stenciled on manifests listing cargoes of cotton, tea, or jute. Yet, during the peak of its service in the mid-19th century, the most profitable and morally fraught, cargoes were often not goods but people, or substances that enslaved them. The ship almost certainly plied the routes to and from Asia, and its operational timeline places it squarely in the era of two interconnected systems that fueled the British Empire's economy: the opium trade with China and the system of indentured labor that replaced slavery in many of Britain's colonies after its abolition in 1833. The serene expression of the figurehead thus becomes a chilling mask, concealing the human suffering that was the foundation of the voyages she led. Consider first the opium trade. For much of the 19th century, the British Empire ran a staggering trade deficit with China. The Chinese wanted silver for their tea, porcelain, and silk, but had little interest in British manufactured goods. To balance the books, the British East India Company, and later private merchants, turned to a different commodity: opium, grown in British-controlled India and shipped to China. This was not a free trade. It was an act of economic warfare. The Chinese government had banned the import of opium, recognizing its devastating social and health effects. British and American merchants, operating from ports like London, became smugglers on an industrial scale. Fast, sturdy ships like the one this figurehead adorned would have been ideal for this illicit trade, running up the coast of China to unload their addictive cargo at night, evading imperial customs junks. The vast fortunes made in the opium trade fortunes that built stately homes in England and funded grand institutions were literally built on the addiction and impoverishment of millions of Chinese people. This single wooden face, therefore, is not just a piece of nautical art. It is a silent witness to a conflict that would culminate in the Opium Wars, forcing China to open its ports and cede Hong Kong to Britain. Alongside the barrels of opium in the hold, or on the return journey, these same vessels often carried a different, yet equally tragic, human cargo: indentured laborers. With the abolition of slavery, British plantation owners in colonies from the Caribbean to Mauritius to Fiji faced a critical labor shortage. Their solution was the system of indentured labor, often described as a new system of slavery. Poor, often illiterate, individuals from India and China were recruited sometimes willingly, often through coercion or deception, and signed contracts, or indentures, binding them to work on plantations for a set period, usually 5 years, in exchange for passage, food, and a small wage. The reality was horrific. The journey itself was a nightmare, with laborers crammed into filthy, airless holds, leading to disease and high mortality rates, in a grim echo of the earlier Middle Passage of the Atlantic slave trade. Once on the plantations, they faced brutal working conditions, systemic abuse, and a life of debt bondage. The ship bearing our figurehead was a direct link in this global chain of human misery, transporting people from one side of the empire to another to service an economic system that demanded cheap, disposable labor. So, how does a relic from such a dark past end up as a monument at a school? The answer lies in a deliberate act of repurposing, a common practice in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. As sailing ships were made obsolete by steam, many were broken up. Their handsome figureheads, symbols of a bygone era, were often salvaged and donated to nautical institutions, museums, and schools as trophies of Britain's maritime heritage. The London Nautical School, founded to train the next generation of merchant seamen, would have been a natural home for such an object. It was presented as an emblem of pride, of craftsmanship, and of Britain's dominance of the seas. The difficult, bloody, and exploitative history of the ship's actual voyages was conveniently scrubbed away, much like the salt crust that once covered the wood. The figurehead was transformed from a functional part of a tool of commerce into a sanitized symbol of nostalgia, its true origin story obscured by a more palatable narrative of adventure and national pride. This transformation forces us to confront a critical question about how we remember our history. Do we honor the object for its aesthetic beauty and its connection to a romanticized age of sail, or do we confront the uncomfortable truths it represents? The London Nautical School's figurehead stands at the intersection of these two choices. It is a beautiful piece of folk art, a testament to the skill of the carvers who could bring a face to life from a single block of timber. But it is also a stark reminder that London's wealth and global position were built not just on noble exploration and honest trade, but on a foundation of addiction, coercion, and human suffering. To see only the serene woman is to accept the sanitized version of history. To understand the voyages she led is to acknowledge a more complex, darker truth about the price of empire and the hidden currents of commerce that flowed right back to the very heart of the Thames. This silent wooden witness challenges us to look beyond the pleasant patina of age and see the full, unvarnished story. But our exploration of London's secrets now takes us to a discovery that moves beyond the lives of kings and merchants into the silent world of those who were largely written out of history. In 2015, construction work for a new train station for the Crossrail project, just outside Liverpool Street, unearthed something archaeologists had long suspected was there but had never fully excavated: the burial ground of the Bethlehem Royal Hospital, the infamous institution better known by its nickname, Bedlam. This was not a cemetery for the wealthy or the powerful. It was a pauper's field for the patients of England's first and most notorious mental asylum, a place where over 3,000 souls were interred between the 1560s and the early 1700s. The artifacts found here were not golden treasures or fine pottery, but the skeletons themselves, and it is through their careful, compassionate analysis that modern science is forcing us to listen to the stories these individuals could never tell in life, revealing the brutal realities of what it meant to be diagnosed with madness in centuries past. When we think of Bedlam, our minds often jump to chaotic images from popular culture, a hellish madhouse where inmates were chained to walls and gawked at by the public for entertainment. While the reality was more complex, the skeletal evidence from the burial ground confirms that life for many patients was one of profound hardship, deprivation, and physical restraint. Bioarchaeologists, who specialize in analyzing human remains, have discovered a range of traumatic injuries consistent with long-term confinement and forceful control. Many skeletons show signs of chronic joint disease, particularly in the shoulders, elbows, and knees. This is not the typical wear and tear of age. This is the kind of damage that occurs from prolonged periods of being restrained in a fixed position, unable to move freely. Imagine the physical toll of being tied to a chair or a bed for months or even years, your muscles atrophying and your joints fusing from disuse. Other skeletons bear the marks of healed fractures, some set poorly, suggesting that injuries sustained during episodes of distress or during forcible restraint were simply left to heal on their own, without proper medical care. The bones, in their silent testimony, paint a picture of bodies under constant duress. Yet, the story becomes even more heartbreaking when we move from evidence of restraint to evidence of disease. Modern analysis of the skeletal remains has uncovered the chemical and pathological signatures of specific illnesses that were utterly misunderstood at the time, and were often mistaken for madness. The most poignant example comes from the detection of mercury in the bones of a significant number of individuals. In the 17th and 18th centuries, mercury was the standard, if utterly toxic, treatment for syphilis. The disease progresses in stages, and in its later, tertiary phase, it can attack the brain, leading to severe neurological symptoms including psychosis, personality changes, and paralysis. A person suffering from this advanced stage of syphilis would have exhibited what their contemporaries saw as clear signs of insanity delusions, erratic behavior, and a loss of mental faculty. So they were committed to Bedlam. Tragically, the so-called cure was often as bad as the disease. The mercury treatment itself caused salivation, tooth loss, and neurological damage, creating a vicious cycle where the treatment for the perceived madness may have worsened the patient's physical suffering, all while the true, bacterial cause of their condition went unrecognized. This biological evidence forces a major reassessment of who was actually inside an institution like Bedlam. It's likely that a large proportion of the patients were not what we would today classify as mentally ill in a psychiatric sense. Instead, they were people suffering from a range of neurological and physical ailments that manifested in ways that society could not, or would not, understand. Conditions like epilepsy, brain tumors, strokes, or even severe vitamin deficiencies could have produced symptoms interpreted as lunacy. The line between a diseased body and a disturbed mind was virtually non-existent in the medical knowledge of the era. A person having a seizure might be seen as possessed. An individual with a brain injury causing personality changes could be labeled a madman. The Bedlam burial ground, therefore, does not just hold the remains of the mentally ill. It holds the victims of a profound medical ignorance, people who were hidden away because their physical suffering manifested in ways that frightened or inconvenienced the society outside the asylum walls. Perhaps the most profound insight from this excavation comes from a different kind of science entirely: isotope analysis. By studying the chemical composition of teeth and bones, scientists can determine where a person grew up and what their diet was like. The results from the Bedlam skeletons were startling. They revealed that a significant number of individuals buried there were not native Londoners. Their isotopic signatures pointed to origins across the British Isles, and even as far away as continental Europe. This finding shatters the notion that Bedlam was simply a London institution dealing with a local problem. It became a dumping ground for the entire nation and beyond. Imagine the journey of a young man from Scotland or a woman from rural Wales, displaying behaviors their families and communities could not manage. They would have been sent on a long, arduous journey to London, a city of overwhelming size and noise, only to be committed to an asylum and to die there, far from home and everything familiar. Their presence in the burial ground speaks to a centralized and deeply grim solution to the problem of social disorder, a practice of exporting those who did not fit into a central repository of human misery. The excavation of the Bedlam burial ground is more than an archaeological project. It is an act of restorative justice. For centuries, the patients of Bedlam were voiceless, their experiences filtered through the often sensationalist accounts of their keepers or the paying public who came to stare. Now, through the silent language of their bones, they are finally bearing witness. The evidence of restraint, disease, and distant origins compels us to replace caricature with compassion. It forces us to see these individuals not as anonymous lunatics, but as human beings who suffered from real, if misunderstood, medical conditions, and who endured a system that could offer little more than confinement. The greatest secret unearthed at the Bedlam burial ground is not a hidden truth about a single artifact, but a profound and humbling lesson about the long, difficult journey of medicine, and the timeless human cost of fear and ignorance in the face of illness. Yet for all the ancient suffering unearthed at Bedlam, a more modern and instantaneous form of devastation fell from the skies over London with terrifying suddenness, leaving a different kind of scar upon the city, one not of slow decay, but of violent obliteration. On a quiet Saturday afternoon, the 25th of March, 1945, with the war in Europe nearly over, a thunderous explosion ripped through the East End. A 12-ton V-2 rocket, traveling faster than the speed of sound, struck the Hughes mansions on Valence Road. The impact was apocalyptic. The 3 blocks of terraced housing were instantly vaporized into a cloud of dust and splinters, killing 134 people and injuring dozens more. It was one of the single deadliest V-2 attacks on London, a tragedy made more cruel by its timing, occurring so close to the conflict's end. Today, the site is marked by a simple, solemn memorial garden and a plaque, but the true artifact here is intangible. The collective memory of the event and the permanent scar it left on the community's heart and the city's physical landscape. This is not an object you can hold in a museum. It is an absence, a void where homes and lives once stood. A story written in silence and loss. The terrifying power of the V-2 lay in its revolutionary and utterly secret origin. This was not merely another bomb. It was the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile, a quantum leap in warfare that rendered all existing defenses obsolete. Unlike the V-1 flying bomb, which puttered across the channel with a distinctive buzzing sound that gave people a few moments to take cover, the V-2 arrived in absolute silence. It descended from the edge of space at over 3,000 miles per hour, striking its target without any warning whatsoever. Its creation was the result of a massive, secret German project at Peenemünde, led by the brilliant and deeply complicated engineer Wernher von Braun. The technological breakthroughs were staggering. The V-2 was powered by a liquid-fueled rocket engine, a marvel of propulsion that burned a mixture of ethanol and liquid oxygen. It incorporated a sophisticated gyroscopic guidance system that could control its flight path for over 200 miles, and it was designed to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere with terrifying accuracy for its time. This was not just a new weapon, it was the birth of the space age, a technology that held the potential to carry a payload not just to another city, but to another planet. This incredible achievement, however, was built on a foundation of unimaginable human suffering, a moral dilemma that would haunt its creators for decades. The manufacturing of the V-2 rockets was not done in pristine, sterile factories. Mass production was moved underground to a secret facility called Middlework, a network of tunnels dug into the Harz Mountains. The workforce consisted of slave laborers from the nearby Baudora concentration camp. These prisoners, living in horrific, inhuman conditions, were worked to death assembling the very weapons that were raining destruction on civilian populations across Europe. It is estimated that more people died building the V-2 rockets in these tunnels, over 20,000 from starvation, disease, and execution, than were killed by the missiles themselves when they were fired. This creates an almost unbearable paradox. A vessel of such advanced human ingenuity, a direct precursor to the rockets that would eventually carry astronauts to the moon, was simultaneously a product of the most primitive and brutal barbarism. Every launch was tainted by the blood of the enslaved people who built it, forcing us to confront the darkest possible question about technological progress. At what cost does advancement come? This moral quandary did not end with Germany's surrender. It defined the immediate post-war world. As the Allies raced to capture German scientific intelligence in a program known as Operation Paperclip, the very architects of the V-2, including Wernher von Braun and his top team, were deliberately recruited by the United States. The Soviet Union executed a similar, competing program, seizing other German engineers and equipment. For the American and British military, the choice was starkly pragmatic. The knowledge locked in the minds of these men was invaluable. They understood ballistic missiles, they had solved problems of re-entry and guidance, and they represented a 5-year head start in a technology that would clearly define the next great conflict. To leave them for the Soviets was unthinkable. To put them on trial for war crimes, while morally just, was seen as a strategic luxury the West could not afford. And so, these former Nazi scientists, whose weapons had killed thousands in London and Antwerp, were given new identities, comfortable lives, and immense resources to build rockets for their former enemies. The legacy of this Faustian bargain is the world we live in today. The same team that developed the V-2 for the Nazis went on to build the Redstone and Saturn rockets for NASA. Wernher von Braun became an American celebrity, a charismatic spokesman for space exploration on television, and the chief architect of the Saturn V rocket that ultimately landed astronauts on the moon. The technology that terrorized London became the key to unlocking the solar system. This direct lineage means that the space race, the Apollo program, and our modern world of satellite communications and GPS all have a direct and deeply troubling genealogical link back to the hellish tunnels of Middlework and the devastation at Hughes Mansions. The Memorial Garden in the East End, therefore, is not just a place to remember the lives lost on one terrible afternoon. It is a site of profound and painful contradiction, a quiet corner of London that forces us to ponder the tangled, often compromised, roots of our modern technological world, where the dreams of reaching the stars were first forged in the fires of war and human suffering. Yet, if we truly want to witness the most spectacular and ephemeral artifacts London has ever produced, we must not look to stone or metal, but to ice. For nearly 200 years, the city's greatest public space was not a square or a park, but the frozen surface of the River Thames itself, transformed during a series of incredible events known as the Frost Fairs. Picture the scene. It's the winter of 1683, and instead of the familiar, murky flow of water, you see a solid, frozen highway stretching from bank to bank. Upon this white plain, an entire, bustling pop-up city has materialized almost overnight. There are rows of temporary shops and stalls selling everything from hot food and ale to printed souvenirs. There are printing presses set up right on the ice, churning out personalized certificates to prove you had walked on the river. You could see puppet shows, watch bear baiting, or even get your shoes resoled by a cobbler whose workshop was, for a few fleeting weeks, the riverbed. This was not a singular, freak occurrence. Major frost fairs were recorded in 1564, 1683, 1714, and 1814, with countless smaller freezings in between. These carnivals on ice were, without question, some of the most vivid and unforgettable events in London's history. But their true origin secret is not a tale of civic celebration, but a global climatic phenomenon, the Little Ice Age. The existence of the Frost Fairs hinges on a simple, physical impossibility in modern London, the Thames freezing solid enough to support the weight of thousands of people, let alone entire streets of wooden booths and printing presses. Today, the river simply does not freeze. The secret to this profound transformation lies in a sustained period of colder global temperatures that gripped the world from roughly the 14th to the 19th centuries. This era, now known to climatologists as the Little Ice Age, saw average temperatures in Europe drop by several degrees Celsius. This was not a uniform deep freeze, but a volatile period characterized by bitterly cold winters, cool, wet summers, and the dramatic southward expansion of alpine glaciers. The causes of this planetary chill are still debated, but they likely include a combination of reduced solar activity, known as the Maunder Minimum, and a period of increased volcanic eruptions, whose ash and sulfates injected into the atmosphere reflected sunlight back into space, cooling the entire planet. London and its river found itself on the front lines of this global climate shift. The city's geography at the time made it uniquely susceptible. The Thames was a much slower, wider, and shallower river than the channelized, engineered waterway we know today. The original London Bridge, with its 19 narrow arches resting on massive starlings, acted like a dam, dramatically slowing the river's tidal flow and allowing ice flows from upstream to jam against it, creating a solid foundation for the Great Freezes. This climatic context reframes the Frost Fairs not as charming historical quirks, but as direct physical evidence of a world grappling with a changed climate. The impact of the Little Ice Age was far more profound than just winter festivals. It was a time of immense hardship. Those cool, wet summers led to repeated crop failures, famines, and widespread social unrest across Europe. The freezing Thames was simply London's most visible and spectacular symptom of a much larger, global crisis. The Frost Fairs were, in a sense, a form of human resilience in the face of this adversity, a defiant decision to throw a party in the heart of a meteorological disaster. The vibrant economy that sprang up on the ice was a testament to the city's irrepressible commercial spirit, but it was a spirit operating under duress. The same frozen river that hosted a fairground also meant that trade by ship was paralyzed. Fuel for heating was scarce and expensive, and the poor suffered terribly in the unrelenting cold. The carnival atmosphere was a thin veneer over a city, shivering through a prolonged environmental challenge. The mechanics of the fair itself were a marvel of spontaneous urban planning. As the ice thickened and was deemed safe, the Lord Mayor of London would officially authorize the fair by ceremonially walking across the river. This act signaled to entrepreneurs and the public that the frozen expanse was open for business. A main street, often grandly named Friesland Street or the City Road, would be laid out, running directly between Southwark and the city. Tents and wooden booths would be erected, forming entire lanes dedicated to specific trades. You could buy a pint of ale in one tent, a slice of roast beef from an ox roasted on the ice in another, and then have your name printed on a keepsake card at a nearby press. These souvenir printers were among the fair's biggest attractions, and their products are now precious artifacts in their own right, providing concrete proof of these fleeting events. Other popular attractions included coach and sleigh rides across the ice, nine-pins bowling, and even entire football matches. It was a world turned upside down, where the normal rules of geography and commerce were suspended, and the river that usually divided the city became its central, unifying thoroughfare. The end of the Frost Fairs marks another, more recent, origin secret. They didn't stop because the world suddenly warmed up. Their disappearance was a direct result of human intervention in the London landscape. In the early 19th century, two major engineering projects fundamentally altered the Thames. First, the old London Bridge, with its ice-jamming starlings, was demolished in 1831 and replaced with a new bridge with wider arches that allowed the river to flow more freely. Second, and perhaps more significantly, the Victorian era saw the construction of the massive embankments along the Thames. These monumental works, designed by Joseph Bazalgette to house his new sewer system, narrowed the river's channel and strengthened its banks. A narrower, deeper, and faster-flowing river is much less likely to freeze. The final Frost Fair was held in 1814. By the time the next major freeze occurred in 1895, the new Thames was already too swift to form a solid, stable surface for a carnival. The Frost Fairs were, therefore, a unique product of a specific climatic window and a specific, pre-industrial river morphology. Their demise signals the moment London's environment was decisively reshaped by modern engineering. Today, the memory of the Frost Fairs lives on in a few scattered artifacts and in the names of riverside pubs, but their true legacy is a powerful lesson in the intimate, and often unexpected, connection between global climate and local history. They force us to see London not as a city isolated from the natural world, but as one deeply embedded within it, its very social life shaped by planetary temperature shifts. The frozen Thames, with its temporary city of revelers, stands as a spectacular monument to a time when a cooler world literally stopped the city in its tracks, and its people, with characteristic ingenuity, decided to dance on the pause button. In an age of modern climate change, the story of the Frost Fairs is a poignant reminder that when the planet speaks, cities listen, and sometimes they even throw a party in response. From the frozen carnival of the Frost Fairs, we turn to a fire that forever reshaped the city, a blaze whose true origin story is not just one of accidental catastrophe, but of a society desperately seeking someone to blame. Tucked away on a modern street in the city of London, a simple, unassuming plaque marks the spot where it all began. It reads, "Here, by the side of the bakery of Thomas Fariner on Pudding Lane, the Great Fire of London started on the 2nd of September, 1666. The official story is one we all know. A spark from the oven, a stray ember igniting a pile of fuel, and a fire that quickly grew into an unstoppable inferno. But this simple narrative conceals a much darker, more complex secret. The bakery fire was the physical trigger, but the political and religious firestorm that followed reveals a city already primed to explode. A place where fear and prejudice could burn just as fiercely as any flame. In the early hours of that Sunday morning, The fire that started in Thomas Farner's bakery found perfect conditions to spread. The summer of 1666 had been long and dry, and London was a tinderbox of wooden buildings packed tightly together, its narrow streets acting like wind tunnels. A strong easterly wind fanned the initial flames, and within hours, the blaze was completely out of control, leaping from house to house and street to street. For 4 terrifying days, the fire raged, consuming over 13,000 homes, 87 parish churches, and the great medieval cathedral of St. Paul's. The city's very heart was reduced to smoldering ash. In the immediate aftermath, as Londoners wandered through the ruins of their lives, a desperate, collective question hung in the smoke-filled air. How could this have happened? The sheer scale of the destruction demanded an explanation more satisfying than mere accident. The human mind, faced with such overwhelming loss, instinctively searches for a cause, and preferably, a culprit. This desperate search for a scapegoat tapped directly into the deepest and most volatile political fear in Restoration England, anti-Catholicism. Just a few years earlier, in 1660, the monarchy had been restored with King Charles II. While Charles was a Protestant, his brother and heir, James, was a known and openly practicing Catholic. The prospect of a Catholic king terrified the largely Protestant population, who associated Catholicism with absolute monarchy, foreign influence, and the tyranny they had fought against in the civil wars. A powerful and paranoid narrative had taken root in the public consciousness, the Popish Plot, a pervasive fear that Catholics were secretly conspiring to overthrow the government and destroy Protestant England from within. The Great Fire, a disaster of biblical proportions, seemed to many like the ultimate act of this imagined conspiracy. The flames were not just fire. In the eyes of a terrified populace, they were the visible proof of a hidden, malevolent enemy striking at the very soul of the nation. Into this volatile atmosphere stepped a most unlikely and unconvincing character, a French watchmaker named Robert Hubert. A few weeks after the fire had been extinguished, Hubert arrived at an English port and made a staggering confession. He claimed he was a Catholic agent and that he had started the Great Fire by throwing a firebowl through the window of the bakery on Pudding Lane. His story was riddled with impossibilities from the start. He described details of the bakery and the lane that did not match reality. Witnesses who had been present at the fire's outset testified that the building had no windows on the street side where Hubert claimed to have thrown his incendiary device. Furthermore, it was later proven that Hubert had not even been in England on the day the fire started. He was aboard a ship that only docked in London 2 days after the blaze had begun. By any rational measure, his confession was a complete and utter fabrication, the ramblings of a confused or perhaps mentally unwell individual. Yet the authorities, under immense public pressure to produce a villain, chose to believe him. Why would they accept such an obvious falsehood? The answer is a chilling lesson in political expediency. The government, led by King Charles's ministers, was terrified of the mob. The public was screaming for a Catholic conspirator's blood, and Hubert, a Frenchman and a self-proclaimed Catholic, fit the profile perfectly. Putting him on trial and executing him was a way to appease the public rage, to provide a cathartic conclusion to the trauma, and to deflect any potential blame from the king's own administration for its slow and disorganized response to the fire. The legal proceedings against Hubert were a sham. Despite the overwhelming evidence that he was innocent and that his confession was false, a jury found him guilty of treason, and he was hanged at Tyburn on the 27th of October, 1666. The city had its scapegoat, and the official narrative of a papist plot was, for a time, legally enshrined. The real, tragic secret of the Pudding Lane plaque, therefore, is not about how the fire started, but about how a society chooses to process its trauma. The execution of Robert Hubert was not an act of justice. It was a ritual sacrifice, an attempt to purify a wounded city by destroying a designated outsider. It revealed the terrifying power of a collective narrative to override facts and evidence. The fire had exposed London's physical vulnerability, but the witch hunt that followed exposed a deeper sickness, a pervasive culture of suspicion and bigotry that could consume an innocent life as readily as the flames had consumed the city's timber and thatch. The plaque marks a location of physical origin, But the true story is one that unfolded in the courtrooms and the crowded streets. A story about the fires of fear that burn long after the last ember has grown cold. But if you truly want to understand the pulse of everyday London across the centuries, you must look not to its grand palaces or towering cathedrals, but to the thick, grey mud of the River Thames at low tide. This is the domain of the mudlark, a modern-day treasure hunter armed with a keen eye and a permit, who scours the exposed riverbanks for the countless small objects the water has surrendered. These are not the golden treasures of a Sutton Hoo or the glittering hoards of a Cheapside jeweler. The mudlark's harvest is far more humble, and in its own way, far more revealing: a broken clay pipe stem from the 1700s, a tiny hand-forged Tudor dress pin, a worn Roman coin so thin you can almost see through it, or a 19th century child's marble. The sheer volume of these finds is staggering, and their collective secret is a profound one. The Thames is not merely a river. It is London's largest, most dynamic, and most democratic archive, a sprawling, open-air museum that holds the material memory of the city's ordinary citizens, preserving the stories that grand history so often forgets. Why does the river give up such an incredible concentration of lost history? The answer lies in a unique combination of geography, human activity, and the preserving power of the mud itself. For 2,000 years, the Thames has been the central artery of London life. It was a highway for trade, a source of food and water, a sewer, a playground, and a battlefield. Its banks were lined with wharves, warehouses, taverns, and homes. In such a densely populated and constantly used space, things were always being dropped, lost over the side of a boat, or simply thrown away. The anaerobic nature of the Thames mud, the fact that it is largely devoid of oxygen, acts as a remarkable preservative. Objects that would have rotted or corroded away on dry land are sealed in this cold, dark, wet environment, often for centuries, waiting for a shift in the current or the hand of a mudlark to bring them back into the light. Each low tide is a turning of a page in this immense, liquid history book, revealing fragments of a past that is astonishingly intimate. Consider the simple clay tobacco pipe. Mudlarks find thousands of fragments, from the small, delicate bowls of the 17th century to the longer stems of the Victorian era. Each broken piece is a tiny timestamp. The style of the bowl, the markings on the stem, even the diameter of the bore hole, can help experts date it to within a few decades. But these pipes are more than just dating tools. They are windows into social ritual and global trade. Tobacco was a New World product that exploded in popularity in England from the 1600s onward. Smoking a pipe was a common social activity, enjoyed by everyone from merchants on the docks to laborers on their breaks. Finding a broken pipe stem is to touch a moment of respite in a long-gone Londoner's day. Similarly, the countless Tudor dress pins, no bigger than a fingernail, speak to the fashions and daily struggles of the Elizabethan era. Before the widespread use of buttons or modern fasteners, clothing was held together with these sharp, handmade pins. To lose one was a minor domestic catastrophe, a small expense and inconvenience for a woman tying her bodice or securing her ruff. Each one found represents a moment of frustration, a tiny failure in the daily battle to stay dressed and presentable in a bustling, muddy city. Perhaps the most poignant finds are the tokens of personal life and belief. Mudlarks regularly uncover cheap, crudely cast lead alloy tokens. In an age when official coinage was often in short supply, these tokens were used as local currency, issued by shopkeepers and taverns to give as change or to pay workers. They are the small change of the everyday economy, the forgotten currency of the poor. Other finds include pilgrim badges, cheap souvenirs sold to those visiting religious shrines. These thin, stamped metal badges, often depicting saints or biblical scenes, were purchased as acts of devotion and worn on a hat or cloak. To lose one in the river on a journey to or from London was to lose a sacred memento, a tangible piece of personal faith. Then there are the toys, a porcelain doll's arm, a tiny lead soldier, or that single glass marble. These objects strip away the centuries, connecting us directly to the children of the past. They remind us that London was always a city of children who played, who lost their toys, and who, in that universal act of childhood carelessness, accidentally donated them to the river's long-term collection. This ever-growing collection of mundane objects provides a history that is fundamentally different from the one told by kings and monuments. The official history of London is a history of power, wealth, and large-scale events. The coronations, the fires, the laws passed in Parliament. It is a top-down narrative. The history of the Thames Mud, however, is a bottom-up, democratic history. It is the history of the dockworker who dropped a coin from his worn pocket, the servant girl who lost a pin from her cap, the smoker who broke his pipe on a stone, and the child who watched their marble roll down the embankment. These objects tell no single, grand story. Instead, they tell millions of tiny, interconnected ones. They reveal the patterns of trade, the evolution of fashion, the nature of work, and the small, personal rituals of faith and leisure. They give a voice and a material presence to the vast, anonymous majority who built the city, worked its docks, and walked its streets, but who left no written records of their own. This is the ultimate secret held in the Thames Mud, that the most complete portrait of a city is not found in its most splendid artifacts, but in its most common discards. The river collects and curates the evidence of daily life with relentless, impartial efficiency. Every lost button, every discarded animal bone from a meal, every worn-out shoe sole, contributes a pixel to a vast, collective portrait of London across time. The mudlark, by carefully recovering these fragments, acts as an archaeologist of the everyday, piecing together a history that is wonderfully human in its scale and its scope. To hold a muddy Tudor pin is to feel a direct, physical connection to a person who hasn't drawn a breath for 400 years. It is a reminder that history is not an abstract force, but the accumulated consequence of billions of ordinary moments, ordinary actions, and ordinary lives, all flowing together into the timeless embrace of the river. So we have journeyed from prehistoric hordes to Victorian sewers, from royal helmets to the discarded pins of the common people. We have encountered forged art, misplaced technology, and skulls that whisper of impossible wounds. Each of these 20 artifacts presented its own unique, captivating puzzle, a standalone mystery that seemed to defy easy explanation. But when we finally step back and view this collection as a whole, when we lay these 20 pieces of evidence side by side, a far grander and more profound secret begins to emerge. The true secret is not in any single object, but in the powerful, interconnected patterns that bind them all together, patterns that reveal London's history not as a clean, linear story, but as a chaotic, magnificent palimpsest, a parchment where countless stories have been written, imperfectly erased, and written over again, leaving tantalizing traces of everything that came before. The first and perhaps most startling pattern we see is one of technological and historical anomalies. Time and again, we are confronted with objects that simply do not fit comfortably within the established timeline of human progress. The London hammer, encased in million-year-old rock, forces us to question the very pace of technological development. The Roman skull, with its gunshot-like wound, asks whether our understanding of ancient weaponry is complete. Even the advanced craftsmanship and global gemstones of the Cheapside Horde point to a 16th century trade network far more sophisticated than our history books typically allow. These aren't just oddities, they are persistent, tangible challenges to the neat and tidy chronology we've constructed. They suggest that history is not a smooth, upward curve of progress, but a series of fits and starts, with knowledge sometimes gained, sometimes lost, and sometimes existing in pockets we have yet to fully acknowledge. These artifacts are the loose threads in the tapestry of time, and when you pull on one, the entire picture threatens to unravel into something much more complex and interesting. Running parallel to this is a second, equally powerful pattern: the relentless struggle for political and religious control, and the way power is literally carved into the city's landscape. The Winchester Palace rose window wasn't just architecture. It was a bold statement of the church's authority, a declaration meant to be seen from the Tower of London across the river. Its deliberate ruin is a direct consequence of Henry VIII's power grab during the Reformation. The London stone, a seemingly humble rock, was imbued with such legendary power that a rebel like Jack Cade felt compelled to strike it to legitimize his rule. And the reconstructed Temple of Mithras stands as a permanent monument to a 20th century conflict between archaeological preservation and commercial development, a different kind of power struggle that still shapes what we see today. From the spiritual offering of the Billingsgate helmet to the political sacrifice of Robert Hubert after the Great Fire, these artifacts show us that London's physical fabric has always been a battleground for influence, where controlling the narrative was just as important as controlling the territory. This leads us to a third, overarching theme, the revelation of forgotten global connections that shatter any insular view of London's past. We often imagine the past in isolated boxes: Roman London, Anglo-Saxon London, Tudor London. But the artifacts scream a different reality. The Sutton Hoo helmet, potentially forged in a London workshop, is a fusion of Celtic, Germanic, and Roman styles. Its garnets sourced from Sri Lanka and India. The Cheapside hoards Colombian emeralds and intricate enamel work map, a clandestine global economy operating with stunning speed. And the ship's figurehead from the London Nautical School, a serene wooden face, is silently tethered to the violent currents of the opium trade and the brutal system of indentured labor that spanned continents. These objects prove that London was never an island unto itself. It was always a nexus, a vibrant, chaotic hub in a vast and interconnected world. Its wealth and its culture continuously fed by invisible lines of trade and influence stretching across oceans. Yet, for all the stories of kings, merchants, and global empires, the most humbling and vital pattern uncovered is the one that gives a voice to the marginalized, to the people whose lives are so often absent from the grand historical record. The Bedlam burial ground does not hold the bones of the powerful, but of the sick, the misunderstood, and the outcast, their skeletons telling a tragic story of medical ignorance and social fear. The countless mundane finds from the Thames mud, the broken clay pipes, the lost dress pins, the child's marble, are the fragmented diaries of the ordinary Londoner. They are the history of the dockworker, the servant, the child at play. They remind us that the city was built not just by monarchs and architects, but by millions of anonymous hands, and their everyday joys and struggles are just as much a part of London's true story as any coronation or parliamentary act. So what is the ultimate secret, the grand unifying theory that connects a Bronze Age axe to a Victorian beam engine, or a Mithraic temple to a V2 rocket impact site? It is this: London's history is not one story, but a million stories layered one upon the other. It is a complex, often contradictory, and endlessly fascinating web of competing truths. The official, polished narrative found in textbooks is merely the top layer, the version that has been sanctioned and repeated. But just beneath that surface lies a hidden depth of alternative histories, of suppressed technologies, of lost connections, and of forgotten lives. The anomalies, the power struggles, the global links, and the voices from the mud are not separate mysteries. They are different facets of the same brilliant, complicated whole. They prove that to understand London, or any great city, you cannot simply read its monuments. You must listen to its whispers. You must learn to read the scars on its landscape, the secrets in its soil, and the ghosts in its river. For it is there that the true, unvarnished, and magnificent story of the city is waiting to be found. This brings us to a crucial, and often overlooked, engine behind so many of these revelations: the passionate amateur, the independent researcher, and the local historian. Time and again, the initial spark that ignited a historical mystery did not come from a university lecture hall or a government-funded dig. It was a metal detectorist in a field, a mudlark scanning the riverbank, or a curious individual with a deep, personal obsession who simply refused to accept the official story. These figures often operate outside the rigid structures of academia, driven by a raw fascination rather than professional obligation, and their contributions create a fascinating, and sometimes fraught, dynamic with the established archaeological world. Consider the very act of mudlarking, which we just explored. For centuries, the Thames has been giving up its secrets, but it is the army of dedicated individuals with permits and a keen eye who systematically recover these fragments. They are not just treasure hunters, they are field archivists, meticulously recording the context of their finds and building vast, crowdsourced databases of everyday history that no single institution could ever hope to assemble alone. Their discoveries, from Roman coins to Tudor jewelry, provide the granular, intimate data that challenges broad historical assumptions. A local historian, spending decades poring over parish records and walking the same streets, can develop an intuitive, deeply grounded understanding of a place that a visiting academic might miss. This granular, place-specific knowledge can lead to powerful insights, like questioning why a certain building faces a peculiar direction or identifying a pattern of land use that suggests a much older settlement hidden beneath the modern city. These individuals are the guardians of microhistory, and their work provides the essential connective tissue that brings the grand narrative of the past to life. This independent spirit, however, inevitably creates tension with the world of institutional archaeology. The established academic process is, by its nature, slow, methodical, and peer-reviewed. It prioritizes caution, verifiable evidence, and a systematic approach to prevent the contamination of sites and the spread of unsubstantiated theories. From this perspective, the amateur can sometimes be seen as a loose cannon, a risk to precious archaeological context, or a purveyor of sensationalist ideas that lack rigorous proof. The initial reception of the London Hammer by mainstream geology is a perfect example of this divide. The establishment quickly offered a concretion-based explanation, viewing the artifact as a geological oddity rather than a historical paradox, and largely dismissed the more extraordinary claims as pseudoscience. For professional archaeologists, the story isn't just the object itself, but the entire context of its discovery, the soil layer it was found in, the objects around it, the precise orientation, all of which can be irrevocably lost if an item is removed by an untrained hand. Yet, it is precisely this maverick, questioning spirit that often forces the institutions to re-examine their own long-held assumptions. The establishment can become, at times, a prisoner of its own consensus. The theory, once widely accepted and published in textbooks, can become entrenched, making it difficult for new, challenging ideas to gain a foothold. The independent researcher, unburdened by the need for academic credibility or the fear of professional ridicule, is often the one willing to ask the awkward, heretical question. They are the ones who look at the Roman skull and say, "That doesn't look like any trepanation I've ever seen," or who study the alignments of ancient sites and propose a pattern that orthodox science had overlooked. While many of these alternative theories may ultimately be disproven, the act of proposing them serves a vital purpose. It shakes the tree. It forces experts to go back to the evidence, to retest their conclusions, and to defend their positions with renewed rigor. This process, however contentious, is essential for the health of historical inquiry. It prevents stagnation and ensures that our understanding of the past remains a living, breathing dialogue, not a set of stone tablets handed down from on high. The story of the ley lines, championed by Alfred Watkins, perfectly encapsulates this entire dynamic. Watkins was a brewer and amateur antiquarian, not a professional archaeologist. His moment of revelation came not in a library, but while looking at a map in the Herefordshire countryside. His initial, practical theory of old straight tracks was a product of an observant, intelligent mind working outside the academic mainstream. The scientific establishment, quite rightly, pointed out the statistical improbability of his alignments and the lack of physical evidence for these straight pathways. But then, a new generation of independent thinkers took his core idea and transformed it, infusing it with a spiritual and energetic dimension that Watkins never intended. This new, esoteric interpretation was almost universally dismissed by archaeologists, yet it captured the public imagination in a way that dry, academic papers never could. It inspired people to look at the landscape with fresh eyes, to feel a sense of mystery and connection to the past. Even if the science is against it, the ley line theory's enduring popularity demonstrates a public hunger for a past that feels more enchanted and meaningful than the one presented in official guides. Ultimately, the relationship between the institution and the independent is not a simple battle between right and wrong. It is a necessary, symbiotic, if often awkward, partnership. The academic world provides the essential framework of methodology, peer review, and long-term preservation. It is the anchor that prevents historical research from drifting into pure speculation and fantasy. But the amateurs, the mudlarks, and the mavericks are the scouts and the explorers. They are the ones on the front lines, making the chance discoveries, asking the uncomfortable questions, and reminding the professionals that the past is not a closed book, but a landscape still filled with uncharted territory. The true secret they reveal is that history is not owned by any single group. It is a collective, ongoing investigation, a conversation between the rigor of the institution and the passion of the independent, and it is in this dynamic, often messy, exchange that our understanding of London's hidden past is continually and wonderfully rewritten. And so, after exploring these 20 tangible relics, we arrive at a pivotal turning point in our quest. The future of uncovering London's secrets no longer relies solely on a construction worker's lucky strike or a mudlark's sharp eyes. It is increasingly becoming a mission of science, driven by technologies that allow us to peer through solid ground, read the genetic code of ancient bones, and digitally rebuild lost worlds. These are the new keys to the city's hidden past, and they are revealing a London we are only just beginning to comprehend. Imagine having a camera that can see through the Earth itself. That, in essence, is the power of ground-penetrating radar. By sending radio waves into the ground and measuring their reflections, archaeologists can now map buried foundations, walls, and even long filled-in ditches without ever breaking ground. It's like giving the city a non-invasive medical scan, revealing the ghostly anatomy of its earliest structures, hidden just beneath our feet. This technology has already detected tantalizing anomalies beneath the streets of the City of London, hints of structures that don't match any known Roman building plans. Could one of these be another temple to Mithras, or perhaps a previously unknown basilica, waiting for a future excavation to confirm its existence? Similarly, LiDAR, which uses laser pulses to create incredibly detailed 3D models of the landscape, is revolutionizing our view of the city's broader topography. From an aircraft, it can digitally strip away modern buildings and vegetation to reveal the ancient, underlying shape of the land. This has been used to stunning effect in the countryside to find lost medieval villages and prehistoric earthworks, and its application in London could help us finally understand the original course of lost rivers like the Fleet or the Walbrook, and pinpoint where early settlements naturally clustered on higher, drier ground, guiding archaeologists directly to the most promising sites. While these tools map the city's skeleton, other scientific advances are telling us the stories of the people themselves. Bioarchaeology and ancient DNA analysis are performing a kind of historical necromancy, pulling intimate life stories from centuries-old skeletons. By studying the isotopes locked in teeth, scientists can now determine not just where a person was born, but also track their movements throughout their life. We've already seen this with the Bedlam skeletons, revealing migrants from across Europe. Now, apply that to a Roman cemetery, and we could trace individual legionaries back to their hometowns in Italy or North Africa. DNA analysis goes even further, allowing us to identify familial relationships in mass burials, understand the genetic history of diseases, and even reconstruct physical appearances. Analyzing the remains from a plague pit could reveal the specific strain of the Black Death that devastated London and shed light on how it evolved. It can tell us about the diet, the illnesses, and the daily physical strains of the common Londoner in a way that no written record ever could. This isn't just data. It's a form of time travel that gives a voice and an identity to the anonymous masses who shaped the city. With these powerful new instruments in hand, we can now confidently speculate about the next great discoveries waiting to be made. One of the most tantalizing quests is for the precise location and full layout of the theater, where William Shakespeare first trod the boards and where his earliest plays were performed. We know it was in Shoreditch, built in 1576, and that its timbers were later used to construct the globe, but its exact footprint and complete dimensions remain a mystery. Ground-penetrating radar surveys in specific areas could finally pin it down, revealing the exact stage where the bard's genius first ignited. Then there are the plague pits. We know they are scattered across the city, often under modern parks or parking lots. A systematic survey using modern technology could map their full, horrifying extent, giving us a definitive understanding of the scale of the devastation and allowing for their proper memorialization. And what of the mythic lost palace of the Plantagenet kings, or the vast Roman cemeteries that must lie just beyond the old city walls? Each of these represents a missing chapter, a void in our knowledge that is now, for the first time, within our power to fill. This means the story of London's secret history is far from a closed book. In fact, we are only just beginning to read its opening chapters. Every time a new building's foundation is dug, every time a scientific paper is published on an old bone, and every time a new radar survey is conducted, another piece of the puzzle clicks into place. The city is a living archaeological site, and its deepest secrets are not static relics. They are dynamic, waiting for the right combination of curiosity and technology to bring them back into the light. The work of understanding our past is accelerating, promising a future where the line between history and the present becomes ever more blurred, and where the silent voices of centuries finally get their chance to speak. And so, we come to the end of our journey through 20 of London's most profound and perplexing secrets. From a hammer that defies time to a skull that questions our entire timeline of technology, from treasures hidden in panic to spiritual offerings cast into the river, we have pulled back the curtain on a past that is far richer, stranger, and more complex than any single history book could ever contain. This is not a city with one simple origin story, but rather a living, breathing palimpsest, a manuscript written, erased, and written over again countless times, where the faint, tantalizing traces of every previous layer are still there for those who know how to look. The official plaques and guidebooks give us a polished, coherent narrative, a story of kings and conquests, of fires and rebuilding. But as we have seen, the true heartbeat of London is found in the anomalies, the contradictions, and the whispers from the shadows. This grand tapestry is woven from three distinct, yet inseparable, threads. The first is the undeniable, verifiable fact, the carbon-dated bone, the geological stratum, the archived document. The second is the powerful, enduring legend, the prophecy of the London Stone, the ghost of King Arthur, the magical energy of ley lines. And the third, perhaps the most captivating, is the unresolved mystery that lives in the space between them. It is the question mark hanging over the Leadenhall Street diptych, the debate between trepanation and a gunshot on an ancient skull, the unknown fate of the person who buried the havering horde. It is in this dynamic tension, this ongoing conversation between what we can prove, what we have always believed, and what we have yet to discover, that the city's most authentic character is revealed. London's history is not a sealed and settled account. It is a living dialogue, a cold case file that is constantly being reopened with every new technological advance and every fresh pair of curious eyes. That is the most important takeaway from our exploration. The next time you walk through London, I encourage you to see it not as a static museum, but as an active archaeological dig. Let your gaze drift from the grand monument to the worn cobblestones beneath your feet. When you pass the grille protecting the London Stone, remember the rebels and kings who saw it as the city's soul. As you cross the Thames, picture the frost fairs that once thrived on its frozen surface and the Roman helmet that was given as a gift to its god. Look at the sleek modern buildings and try to envision the Tudor shops and Roman temples that lie entombed in the earth below. Question the official story, wonder about the objects in the museum cases, and ask yourself what whispered truths they might be keeping secret. History is not merely the chronicle of the powerful and the celebrated. It is equally the story of the common people, the outcasts, the sick, the forgotten, and the lost. Their voices may have been silenced in the written record, but they speak to us still through the objects they dropped, the treasures they hid, and the bones they left behind. Our journey may be concluding, but the investigation is far from over. London will continue to reveal its secrets, and you can be a part of that discovery. What did you think of the theories we explored today? Was the Roman skull a victim of advanced weaponry or a skilled surgeon's hand? Do you believe the Sutton Hoo helmet was forged in a London workshop? Perhaps you have a local mystery from your own city or town, a strange artifact or a persistent legend that challenges the accepted history. The conversation doesn't end here. it continues with you. Share your thoughts, your own theories, and the hidden histories of your own corner of the world in the comments below. Let's keep unearthing these incredible stories together, because the greatest secret of all is that history is not a destination, it's an endless, fascinating journey of discovery.